Our special council meeting Tuesday, June 11th. Can I get a motion, please, for the adoption of the agenda as amended, as completely amended? Councillor Richardson, Councillor Elmsley, all in favor? That's passed. Is there any disclosure of pecuniary interest in today's items? Seeing none. We have no deputations. We'll move right into correspondence. We have a request. We've just put this at the beginning for a noise bylaw exemption. It's time sensitive. That's why we've squeezed it onto this meeting. You'll move it, Councillor Elmsley? Second by Councillor Dunn. Is there any comments, issues? All in favor? That's passed. And we'll move right into item 6, which is the financial overview. CAO Ron Taylor and Jennifer Stover, Director of Corporate Services. Welcome.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and through you, happy to walk everybody through today, not just me, but all of us, our financial state, sort of where we've come from, where we're at right now, where we trended and concluded in 2018, and then starting to look beyond and through our long-term range financial plan. And I will say thank you in advance for dramatically amending the agenda. We thought it was important to really show that progression sort of through the reports, through the presentations. So what you're going to see today is really a very high-level just reminder of where we've come from in terms of the long-range planning. And then we want to start with closing the books in 2008. We'll talk a little bit about how we're trending now this year in 2019, and then what to expect or what we should be considering for 2020 and beyond budgets. And so I'm going to start off just very briefly, just reminding you, you've heard me say this many times, but I think it's always good to remind where we came from. We undertook an extensive core service review back in 2016, and again, I don't say it lightly. We looked at 25% of all of our services and programs that we deliver. We turned them inside out. We looked at options and ways to enhance those services, improve them, consolidate them, and the outcomes, as I know you know, were everything from sort of how we manage our capital assets and deliver services within those, right down to day-to-day operations and efficiencies and processes. And so again, we reviewed 49. In those early days, over the 2 to 3 year period, we had clear savings of $8 million. We knew we were right on track in terms of taking that approach and really looking at it through a Lean Six lens. And training both a core group of staff to start, but then expanding that. And we've continued to do that quite aggressively over the last 2 years, and certainly continuing on into this year. I mentioned to you last time, I believe early this year, that we had approximately 100 staff that were trained in that methodology, and really looking at their processes and how things are done. And now we're targeting about 170 staff. So it's, again, it's been a great experience. We're getting great feedback. We're seeing constant improvements and efficiencies and customer experience through our processes. As you know, in 2017, the city adopted a 10-year financial plan. And to me, that was really a turning point, if you will. It was really starting to look at our finances, our budgets, how we make decisions over the long term, starting to highlight if we make decisions today, how does that impact us down the line, and sort of starting to set some high-level priorities, if you will, or guiding principles in managing taxpayer money. The main one being, and I think it was unanimous through that council, and I've heard it consistently, is we really want to strive for sustainable tax levy increases, wherever those may be, but we don't want to be in a circumstance where we're crisis managing year to year. There's a number of unknowns. We haven't put aside funds, if you will, for a rainy day, for emergencies, and we also want to move the bar. We want to deliver and enhance our service delivery, so we have to make sure that our plan takes all of that into consideration and looking at sort of affordability over the long term. And so that means certain things like building our reserves, both reserves for how we can pay for things down the line that are planned, and then also reserves that I'll say are uncommitted. They're reserves that we do truly need for emergencies or some circumstances that were truly unknown or unforeseen. And as you know, and we've gone through this through asset management planning and so on, we have over $3.2 billion worth of assets in the city that we manage, and we don't want to be doing that year over year. We want to make sure that we manage those assets methodically and responsibly. And again, it allows for longer term decisions, or at least knowing what impacts are going to occur in the long term based on decisions that are made today. And so this is a graphic that you've seen in different iterations, but I think it's always a good baseline. Again, it reminds sort of where we came from, where we're at, and where we're heading in terms of our long-term financial plan. And I mentioned those principles, and to me, they're reminded on the screen in bullets. We want stability. So when I say stability, that means it's predictable and that it's affordable for our ratepayers. The target was to look at year-over-year cost of living adjustments. So we certainly, in terms of affordability, we don't want double-digit tax increases. We certainly don't want high tax increases year over year. And contingency planning. At the same time that we're, again, delivering the core services that we're required to deliver, we want to make sure that we're saving for a rainy day, we're saving for those other services. And so that's just sort of an introductory, Mr. Mayor. I'm going to turn it over to Jennifer Stover, the director. She's going to walk you through some of the other specific elements and funding. Thank you.
Good morning. So I'm going to talk a little bit about our investment focus, and we've seen this slide before, but I think it's important to look at it again because we are talking about sort of that longer-term plan and being able to accommodate the unknowns that are coming at us. So if we look at the blue bars, this is showing from 2010 to 2014 where the tax dollars were being invested. They were being more heavily invested in the operating budget or day-to-day operations. Our capital budget investment was declining, and we were virtually making no contributions to our reserves. In 2015 to 2019, I think largely impacted by the financial plan, you can see that we're spending less on operations, we're doing things a little bit more efficiently, but we're making a significant contribution to the capital budget while contributing to reserves and growing those reserves. And so that really does point to the benefits of a long-term plan and being able to make longer-term decisions instead of just focusing on what's in front of you today. So the next couple of slides, we're going to talk about what's happening both locally and provincially in the landscape. And again, one of the benefits of having that long-term plan is that ability to flex when things are changing. And a lot of the things we're going to talk about in the next couple of slides, we didn't know about 2 years ago when we were putting the long-term plan together for the first time. And some of these things we didn't know about 2 months ago, and I would suggest that some things even changed as of last night. So it just goes to show that we really need to be able to be flexible in how we're moving forward. So locally, things that will impact the 2020 budget and future budgets that we have some unknowns on. We've got 7 collective agreements that have either expired or are expiring. So it's not that we didn't know those were expiring, but we certainly don't know the impacts of what's going to happen with those and what it'll mean from a dollar perspective. The impact of increasing weather-related events. We had some flooding earlier this year. I can let you know that the winter control budget for 2019 is pretty much fully spent. And we still have the latter half of this year to get through. So that's going to be a continued pressure going forward, probably not just for 2020, but budgets moving forward beyond that. We have a waste contract that needs to be renewed next year. We haven't put that out to tender yet. It's going out now, so we should know the impacts of that soon, but that could be anything from status quo to a significant increase. The water and wastewater contract is also expiring. Recycling, previously that was a revenue source for the city. Currently it's a cost, and I think some announcements came out yesterday that may change that again. So we'll see what happens with that. And then of course increasing fuel prices. We're all seeing it personally, but it has a huge impact to the city. We have a number of vehicles that are out on the roads. From a provincial level, there's many things that are changing. The Ontario Municipal Partnership Fund, you'll recall we brought this up as part of the 2019 budget deliberations. The city is receiving $7.4 million. We know that the province is reducing that funding. We don't know by how much. If they were to eliminate it entirely, we'd have an immediate 7% tax levy increase. Those dollars go directly to the operating budget to help keep tax levy funding down. So again, the treasurer had a phone conversation last week on this. It's still unknown what's going to happen for 2020, other than we know it's going to be reduced. And they're expecting late this year to be making that announcement. For paramedic services, currently the province funds 50% of budgeted expenditures. And I deliberately use the word budgeted. So if we are going over budget in paramedic services, that's 100% ours to fund. So they give us 50% of the budget. We've been advised that they're going to start holding funding to the 2018 levels. So for 2020, we know that'll be an impact of roughly $400,000. On childcare, there's a number of changes happening there. In the operations level, there's reductions coming in the base funding of about $256,000. The administration thresholds being reduced with some cost sharing at 50-50. Expansion, currently we get 100% funding. It's moving to 80. All of that combined is we're looking at a reduction in funding for 2020 of $850,000. On long-term care, the province has historically funded roughly $150,000 in structural compliance. That is typically used to support capital initiatives, and we've been advised that that funding is being eliminated August 1st of this year. Ontario Works, there's changes to the administration allocations and performance targets. Again, 2020, we're looking at a net impact of roughly $340,000 for that decision. Library services, there's currently the opportunity to get funding for interlibrary transfers, so books can be moved around between libraries. That's being eliminated. That'll have a $10,000 impact starting in 2020. The health unit, the province currently funds 75%. That funding, again, decreasing to 70% for 2020, and we're expecting approximately $310,000 shortfall as a result of that decision. So when we combine all of those items that we talked about, the ones we know about, they're just over $2 million, the cumulative impact. That doesn't include the OMPF funding. We don't know what's going to happen with that, but we're looking at a minimum of almost a 2% hit to the budget before anything else is known at this year, or for 2020. And again, OMPF we know is going to go down, so that number will likely go up. So just to summarize, sure. You want to summarize? I'll pass it over to the CAO to summarize.
Yeah. Thanks, Jennifer. So I just want to conclude sort of as we're leading into now, we're talking about 2018. We're going to be talking about budgets and informing 2020 budget. And I think it's important that everybody remembers sort of that overview in terms of the landscape. It's changing rapidly. There are some, I'll say, unknowns in terms of the bottom line, how that's going to impact us. But again, I think on a positive note, I believe in much better stead to be able to weather these storms, if you want to call them that, or to certainly sort of look at the service delivery again and align it with some of these cuts and changes and really try to maintain those priorities that we talked about early on, which is stability, predictability, affordability, but trying to maintain those service levels, at least those core service levels that we need to deliver. Again, the long-range plan is another. Obviously, it needs to be nimble and adjustable based on things like this. And this is significant change. This isn't sort of minor things that are coming down the pipe. This is a fundamental shift in how the provincial government is funding municipalities. So you're going to see today as well in terms of recommendations, you're going to see good news from 2018. You're going to see some one-time funding that was transitional from the province and others. And we're going to be recommending that based on this climate and this uncertainty in the immediate term, that we sort of hold the line, that we track it, that we look at our services concurrent, but that we really put those into reserves so that when you are deliberating your 2020 budget, you're able to transition it so that, again, services aren't at peril, but at the same time, we do have some supporting funding. So thanks for that, Mr. Mayor, and certainly happy to answer any questions.
Thank you.
Or Jennifer may be happy to answer them.
Yeah, we'll get a motion to receive. We'll see if there's any questions. Councillor O'Reilly and Vale, are there any questions regarding that part of the presentation? All in favor? That's passed. Thank you. Sorry, we'll move into item 7.1, which is the 2018 year-end position presentation by Carolyn Danes, the Treasurer.
Hello, everyone. I hope you all have coffee to stay awake, but this is a very good news presentation. I much prefer these to letting you guys know that there's a deficit. So we're going to talk a bit, we're going to talk about the results of the audit. Our audit is now done. We're going to review the financial statements for the overall surplus, a little bit of a high-level variance. I have some financial indicators that I'm going to share with you, some balance sheet items that you guys always want to know about. Long-term debt will be one of them, and then some of the note disclosures that we have in the financial statements. So today is the day, because I'm presenting today, that's our audit report date. We have an overall annual surplus of $5.2 million prior to reserve transfers. And as you know, in the past, you have approved the area rate surpluses to go into reserves in order to stabilize increases in the future. So if we had a big increase in OPP, we'd have a reserve to draw from in order to not make that a big increase in that year. As well, water and sewer, any surplus in water and sewer over and above the actual amounts that we put to the infrastructure reserves goes to a reserve, the water and sewer infrastructure reserves, in order to be used for capital. So this is what it actually looks like when you have all the reserve transfers out of there. We have a general tax rate surplus of almost 2.9 million, an area tax rate deficit of 247,000, and an surplus of KLHHC of 549,000. Now, one of the things that happens with KLHHC is that goes into a reserve as well. That was a resolution of council. I wanted to reflect this amount, though, just to tell you what's going on at KLHHC, because I find it very interesting. They have really been able to reduce their utilities year after year, and I think the reduction in the hydro costs actually helped them again this year. But one of the interesting items of the basic income pilot, and we'll talk about that a little bit in the OW area, is it increased revenues or increased incomes for those people who were renting, so therefore their rent went up. So there was an increase in their rent, and we'll see that in the OW area as well. So we have an overall operating surplus of about 3.2 million. So some of the reasons why we have this increase or this surplus in the general tax rate of 2.8 million. Employee benefits. We've talked about the workman's comp issue that we're going to be facing in the future. In 2017, this amounted to over $1 million in expenses. In 2018, this was only about 500,000. But when we did the year-end entry for workman's comp, because what happens is we get a prediction of what our future costs of workman's comp will be, and it went up significantly, like in the millions of dollars. So we know it's coming. There might have been some cases that happened late in the year. I'm not sure why 2018 was so low, but it's trending to be about $1 million again in 2019 when I look at the figures. As well, Green Shield, we went to Green Shield where they base our expenses on actual at the end of the year. They do a reconciliation. And we have been getting some fairly good refunds in the past, and this year it's about over 600,000 that we got based on what we pay out. We pay just a regular monthly fee, and then they reconcile at the end of the year. So that was a good news story. Winter control, as Jennifer mentioned, this was over by only about $400,000. So that's, Usually we're over by about $1 million. So this was, a good news story, but we did increase the budget. 17, we had about a $7.8 million expenditure. So 18, we increased the budget to 7.8, and our actual was 8.3. So in 19, we've increased the budget to 8.6, and we've already spent 7.8. So there's always that uncertainty when you deal with weather-related expenditures. If there's a bad November and December, then we will be over in winter control. I'm almost positive we'll be over in winter control, frankly, because if you look at the 18 experience, up until the end of June, we were only at 5.7 million spending, and we're now at 7.8 million. So we have some revenue over budget as well. Landfill revenue, Lindsay and Fenelon Falls came in over budget. We received a blue box grant that actually increased about over 100,000 more than we thought it was going to be. Our SEPs came in over $1 million with a budget of only 600,000, indicating maybe some growth going on there, which is good. Investment income, we moved things around in our investment portfolio. We discovered that we have a municipal fund called the One Fund that actually was giving interest rates in a high interest savings of over 2.8%. So we didn't realize we could get in on that one fund without getting in on the other. They deal with equities and they deal with bonds, and we weren't interested in going there because there is that commission, but we could get in on this high interest savings with no commission, no fees at all. It's just like putting it in a bank account, so that was very good. And the basic income pilot, so just that reverse effect on our bottom line, because they had that income, the income related benefits that we paid out were reduced as well. Okay, so the area rate surplus, we had, here's the summary. We did have deficit in transit, fire area C, and Lindsay Parks. And none of them were really revenue related. Transit was a little bit. The cash fares seemed to be lower than what we had budgeted, but the other ones where we sell tokens and that kind of thing, they were higher than budget. So it was just that cash fares. Fire area C was they had more fires, obviously, in that area. Volunteer firefighters was over budget, and the wages were over budget in that area. And Lindsay Parks was mainly due to fleet charges. The OPP, Kawartha Lakes Police, Streetlight, and Fire Area A were all over budget and will go into reserves for future years for those. There were no reserves for the Transit, Fire Area C, or Lindsay Parks, so they will be taxed on the 2019 levy. So that's just basically a summary. The total deficit was 247,730. So the financial indicator review, we do get sent a financial indicator review by the ministry after we file our FIR for the year. So they did send us the one based on 2017 figures, so I've updated them for 2018 figures because we do have our FIR filed. It was due May 31st. So tax receivable as a percentage of taxes levied, we always do really well on this. We, have a good team that's always out there trying to get the taxes paid. And so right now our taxes owing on $134 million of taxes is only $4.8 million. So we have a very low risk in this area. 2018 is 3.64%, last year was 3.54%. That could be a difference in the allowance. We do allow for some areas, some tax accounts that maybe, I think in the past it's been shopping mall and vacancy rebates in the shopping mall was one of the big things that we had. So if you had a vacancy, you could apply for some tax relief. Reserves as a percentage of operating expenditures. So this tells the ministry how much money is set aside for future. And this is something that we really want to concentrate on, obviously, and we are going to come forward with a reserve plan before the end of 2019. We have a moderate risk. This is one of our only moderate risks in the financial indicator review that the ministry does. We did talk to them about it. They are not overly concerned, didn't seem, but they do want to see this number a little bit lower than this. Okay, total cash is a percentage of current liabilities, so this is our ability to pay our liabilities out of our cash that's sitting around. So our 2018 cash was 9.3 million, liabilities was 31. We're in a low risk because it's greater than 5%. So average for single tier is 178%. We do have, if you took into account our investments, which really aren't very long-term because we tend to invest more on the short term, we'd be at 233%. So just a matter of semantics there. Our debt to reserve ratio is our next one. And here we've always, when we initially set out our debt to reserve ratio many years ago, we said we wanted to be at 1 to 1. And we have hit 1 to 1 in the past. We're now at 0.71 to 1, and our average for a single tier is 1.4 to 1. So that, again, is reflection of the reserves, and we need to work on putting those monies away. Debt servicing cost is a fairly significant item in that when I talked to the ministry about the annual repayment limit, which I've talked to council about many times, this is one of the areas they look at as well to see how healthy you are and how they feel about your debt load. And our ratio is 6.21%. It was 6.1%, indicating that we did go out for debenture in 2018. But they would only become concerned, they told me, at 7.5%. So we're always trying to balance that out, and you'll see the annual repayment limit here shortly as well. So we're going to talk about our balance sheet items: Northwest Trunk receivable, long-term debt, development charge reserve, and accumulated surplus. So the Northwest Trunk receivable, I don't have a slide on, but I will mention this because the auditors wanted me to indicate to council that there has been no collections on the Northwest Trunk receivable. So this is the money that the developers owe us from front-ending the Northwest Trunk. So they are increased each year. The amount owing is increased each year by the construction index, so that they're paying more each year. So if they go out to develop, when they go out to develop, they will owe more than they would have owed when we first initiated the receivable. No one has paid on this since 2016. There's been no payments in 17 or 18, but I just wanted to assure you that there are liens on those properties. So if they go to sell or whatever, there is a legal responsibility for them to pay us. And it is increasing each year, so I think in their strategy they need to think about that amount that's going to eventually be owing. So the long-term debt. So what happened in long-term debt was we did go out for some debenture in 2018. In the general tax rate debt, we went out for 3.7 million and we paid off 3.6 million. So there's just a little bit of a difference there. Water and sewer debt was really where we went. We did debenture some projects. Water and sewer projects seemed to take a little longer, so there was quite a few that finished up in the year. 6.6 million increase in debenture with payments of 3.2. And the housing debt has gone up as well. You'll see we had 2.3 million in new debt for some of their new projects that they are building, and over approximately 1 million in payments. The others are just normal payments on debt. So we talked about debt analysis, and what we always look to is the annual repayment limit and the debt servicing costs. I've indicated to you that our debt servicing cost as a percentage of operating revenue is healthy. Our annual repayment limit, it relates to principal and interest payments. The ministry will never say you can only go out for 100 million in debt. They will say you can go out and only have 37.3 million in debt and interest payments. So our total principal and interest in 2018 was 14.5 million. We have an annual repayment limit left of 22.8. And if you look over a 10-year term, that gives us a room of 175 to 240 million. If you took that out over 20 years, it would be 340 million. So we're fairly healthy on that end as well. Deferred revenue. Now, I've talked to council as well about the DC reserve and the fact that we are spending more than we're actually bringing in. Our 2018 DC reserve finished in a debit balance, so that means a bad balance of 2.4 million. And I'm predicting that by the end of 2019, our DC will be in an approximately $10 million deficit, of which I will have to debenture. I've already done one debenture for 10 million to right-size the DC reserve, and I'll be going out for another debenture in 2019. So our history of DC revenue is just not keeping pace with our growth projects, and we're working with the engineering staff to better forecast that. For example, our DC revenue this year was 4.9 million, and in 17 it was 3.6, and in 16 it was 2.4. So at least it's showing an increase, but it's just not the increase that was predicted in the DC study. In our accumulated surplus, this shows kind of a snapshot of everything. So our operating fund was 3.2 million. Capital fund surplus was small of 226. So that's all the projects and all the funding that goes into those projects. Employee future benefits, you see that large increase of approximately 9 million, and that's mainly to do with our WSIB liability. Post-closure landfill costs, again, this would be what it would cost to have to close all the landfills with the cover and everything we had to do to monitor it. We include accrued interest and long-term debt. Our long-term debt's in here, reserves of 41 million, and then our tangible capital assets have increased, obviously, due to improvements and purchases that we've made in that area. So if you look at the report that's also on the agenda, we're recommending that the general tax rated surplus of approximately 2.9 million go to WSIB contingency reserve, so it's within the contingency reserve of $600,000 because we know there's pressures coming there. As
Caroline,
well.
let's see if it's okay, we'll do
sure.
the report. Let me wrap up the presentation part
Sure.
of it first, if
Okay.
that's okay. We'll see if there's any questions, and then
Sure.
we'll move over to the report.
Okay.
Sorry to jump in on you. We need a motion to receive the presentation by Carolyn Danes regarding the 2018 year-end position. Councillor Elmsley, seconded by Councillor Richardson. Councillor Elmsley, you had a question on the presentation?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Actually, I have 2 or 3 questions. Thank you for the presentation, and it's hard to pick holes in a
Yes.
surplus, but just to be clear, none of the surplus as shown had anything to do with deferring projects, capital projects, is that correct?
No.
All the capital projects were either started, that we budgeted, were either started or completed during the
Definitely.
year?
This is just operating, yeah, the
Okay.
2.9 million, yeah.
I'm wondering if I could get a better explanation on Green Shields, because the only Green Shields I know is a stockbroker where former
Sorry.
quarterback Sam Etcheverry used to work. So could you give me a better explanation
Sure.
of what Green Shield is, please?
Sure. Through you to the councillor. Green Shield is our group benefit carrier. So it's our, for our drugs, our prescription drugs and, massage therapists, those kind of things, the health plan that we offer to the city employees. So we pay a set amount each month. So I'm not even sure how much it is, but we say it's 50,000. And every year, they add up all of those payments that we made, and then they look at everything that they paid out for the employees, and they reconcile it at the end of the year. There's
Thank
always
you.
every year that we've been in this sort of format, there has been a surplus. I believe in 2017, it was over 900,000.
Okay,
So-
thank you. The other one I had, when you showed one of your first slides and we took off what was going into area rating,
Yes,
I thought that the number was around 3.2 million as a surplus, and then all of a sudden it was 2.8, and I wondered what happened to the $400,000. See there, it shows as 3.
you separate out the surplus between two areas, the general tax rate and the area tax rate. Area tax rate is totally different than the general tax rate, as those areas are just, the funds are raised for that area specifically. So we had 5.2, we have to take off 2.1, so we have 3.1. And then, so that leaves us with a general tax rate. Overall, the 5.2 was everything.
Right. Right.
General area, water and sewer, and KLHHC.
But I
So
think in your next slide, it shows as 2.8.
that's the general rate, tax rate surplus. If you see the 2.8 on this slide.
Oh, okay.
It just refers to the general tax rate surplus.
Okay.
Yes.
I thought I was missing 400,000.
No.
This year already, we did some, we put some money into capital reserves.
Yes.
From closed projects, capital closed, and also the proposal for putting some of this budget savings into reserves. And I'm wondering if you know offhand what that does to our reserve ratio and whether it improves it to closer to where we want to be.
Through you. I can talk generally. I don't have the numbers in my head, but I know that we did, without the, like the doubling of the gas tax grant, I haven't figured that into these numbers. So I just know that we had a fairly large capital budget this year. In fact, one of the larger ones that we've ever had. And so that has reduced the what I like to call the asset management plan reserve, because it's not like the capital reserve to me is the amounts that go back and forth when you close projects. So this is the financial plan reserve. It has gone from 13 million to $1.8 million, even with all those transfers that we did for from the fleet reserve at budget time, that kind of thing. But I don't know the effect of all the grants, the extra grants that we've had, the 725,000, the 4.6 million, those kind of things. But it is, I would say it's improved. I wouldn't say it's a significant improvement.
Okay.
Okay.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Councillor Riley?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Maybe slide 10, Carolyn, could you just elaborate more on about the risks you were talking about, or awareness from the province?
The province has an indicator, so they
Yeah.
say that anything from 10 to 20 is a moderate risk, and anything over 20% is a low risk. So they're wanting to see our reserves as a percentage of operating expenses be a little higher, because that means that we're putting money away for the future. So if there's something that goes wrong, there's an emergency, there's a big flood where we have to pay millions of dollars out, they want to see that we have the money saved in order to do that. It's basically like a savings account.
Just basically putting more in the reserve. Just
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The other thing is, maybe you or Jennifer are going to talk more about it, is the DC situation. Is there any problem, do we have a problem going for more debentures? We've debentured once. Is that going to be an issue, or is there a challenge, or either maybe to you or to Jennifer?
Oh, there you go. It was flashing before. There are some challenges with the development charge reserve in that it's in a negative position. We're currently, once we go out to debenture, we'd be in a position where 100% of the DC dollars coming in would be used to pay for the principal and interest on the debenture. So there'd be no money available to actually build new projects. Having said that, we anticipate that there is going to be some development coming on board that will help to spurn that on and get reserves in a more positive position. And I believe Adam has some information in his presentation on development charges. I think that it's fair to say that Council has approved projects that were needed to stimulate growth. And where we need to be cautious is in not approving projects that are there to service growth. So things like parks and libraries and all of those things that have now been removed under Bill 108 is really the projects that we want to be cautious about. So I think we're fine going forward, and we just need to be aware of the situation.
Could I add to that, actually? I think that if we weren't seeing the growth, we weren't seeing SUPs going up, we weren't seeing DC revenues going up, I'd be very concerned. But I'm seeing that each year those DC revenues that come in are increasing. They're not increasing to the level where we, in the DC study, that the whole DC reserve is based on, but, so that's why we have to be very cautious of what we approve in the future for DC funding. And as well as SUPs coming in higher than budget is a good indicator that growth is starting.
I won't belabor it now, wait till Adam makes his presentation too, but I guess we don't really know the full effect of Bill 108 yet either, right?
No, we don't, no.
Thank you.
Just a couple of years. Councillor Ashmore?
Mr. Mayor, just a question to Carolyn. Earlier on, there was, under the general reserves, it said 32 million, but then sort of the second or third from the last, it said 41 million. I wasn't quite sure what our general reserves are, because earlier it did say 32 million. And of those reserves, how much of it is the legacy chest fund? So it's not all money that's sitting in an account that we can use, right?
Okay.
Most of it's legacy chest fund, is it?
Okay, so there's two indicators here. This is the general reserve, debt to reserve ratio, and we're only taking the general levy debt. So only the debt that relates to tax funding. So if we were to, if I was to show you where the principal and interest payments are, they're the ones that are being funded by tax levy, not by water and wastewater rates or housing. So that's why this is 32 million, because we have reserves that are water and wastewater related as well as housing related. So we had to take those out in order to give you this indicator. So then if you look at this one, here, the reserves, total reserves are 41 million. However, that's just reserves. There's a difference between reserves and obligatory funds, which fall under deferred revenue in our financial statements. So reserves are what is under the control of council. So council could take that 41 million and spend it whatever they want, whatever way they want to spend it. Even though you've committed to different projects, you can change that by resolution. The obligatory funds are in deferred revenue, and those are the legacy chests and the DC reserves and those kind of things. And I believe in my report, I give you a listing of all of the deferred revenue, and then I give you a listing of the reserves as well. So they're two totally separate items. Because you can't, council can't change the use of an obligatory reserve. They can't fund, training or something out of the DC reserve. It's only it has specific requirements on how it can be spent. So that's the difference in those two numbers.
Thank you. Any further questions? We have a motion to receive. All in favor? That's passed. Okay, item 7.2 is the actual report that accompanies that presentation. So do you want to just give us a quick overview on that,
Sure.
Caroline, and then we'll
Yep.
see where it goes?
So as stated in my presentation, we do have approximately a $2.9 million surplus. So if you read the report, you'll see that we are recommending that $600,000 go to the contingency reserve for WSIB stabilization, because we know, given the magnitude of the increase in the WSIB payable at the end of the year, that this is going to only increase. $200,000. Now, this was a little bit of an oversight that we found back in when we were reconciling the costs of the housing project, that there was $200,000 that had been committed from the Building and Property Department, or Division, I guess, back in 2016 or 17. And when we decided to go ahead with the project, we did not transfer those funds with the project. So just to clean things up in that area, we wanted to ensure that that $200,000 got to the right spot. And as well, the remainder we're saying to go into the asset management plan reserve, which is part of the capital reserve, but still committed to that financial plan. But it's, as I stated in the previously, as well as in the report, that at the end of 2019, it will only have a balance of 1.8 million. So we need to ensure that it has enough money to support the capital going forward.
Done?
And then I'm done, yes.
Thank you. So just for clarification, the $200,000 to the Lindsay Street housing, there was a resolution from council that be within budget and not go over budget. So I know there's some background to that. It's not actually an increase over budget. It's just a transfer of some funds. Can you just give us a little more background on that so that we're all at ease that we're
Okay, sure. When we started out the 68 Lindsay Street project, that is almost finished now, we started out that project in 15 with a feasibility study. And at that time, council resolved that 200,000 of the cost of that feasibility study would come from the Building and Property Division in that year. As well, 100,000 was transferred from the Property Development Reserve. We updated our costs of the building, came back to council and asked for a larger debenture amount. And at that time, council said, that is fine, but we don't want you coming back here for any more money. That is your limit. And so as I was going through reconciling the funding with the expenditures, I noticed that that 200,000 had not come across from the Building and Property Division. So we need that 200,000 to balance the total costs. And it should have been there from the get-go, but it was just an oversight. So we're just correcting that oversight right now.
Okay, thank you. So the motion is that the 218 year-end position be received, that the auditor's report be received, and the audited financial statements for 218 be approved as circulated, that council authorizes a transfer of the 218 surplus of $2,879,995 to the following reserves: $600,000 to the contingency reserve for WSIB rate stabilization, $200,000 to the Lindsay Street Housing Project, 953170501, and $2,079,995 to the Asset Management Plan Reserve for future capital. Anybody want to move that? Councillor Dunn, you'll move that. Seconded by Councillor Seymour Fagan. Are there any questions, comments? You want to speak to it, Councillor Dunn? No? We're good? Councillor Seymour Fagan? Okay, all in favor? That's passed. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
You just turn that mic off if you would, then we can all speak. Thank you. So item 7.3 is a memo that I put forward regarding the 219 life cycle extension budget. It's a memorandum that the memorandum from myself regarding the 219 life cycle extension budget be received, and that the life cycle extension budget for 219, that's this year's budget, be increased up to an additional $800,000 to be funded from the Asset Management Plan Reserve that we just put the money into, and to accommodate additional priority roads that need immediate attention, and that staff report back to council with the list of roads included in the 219 life cycle extension program after the tender has been awarded, which my understanding will be shortly by the end of the month. So shortly we'll get a list of those roads. Is that correct?
That's correct. We plan to have the tender package over to purchasing by the end of this week. It's probably, purchasing needs about a week or so,
Okay.
And then by early next month.
Thank you. So if anybody wants to move that, I will speak to it if you like. Councillor Seymour Fagan and Councillor Dunn. I guess, do you want to speak to it, Councillor Seymour Fagan? Dunn? Councillor Dunn, you're okay?
Yeah, we've already talked about this several times, and that's a program that we need, so I'm good on it.
Yes, and the rationale was, you know, with the spring, I know you've read the rationale, but with the spring weather that we've had, and, you know, with our 5-year roads plan, I think we were catching up slowly but surely. We had a good plan moving forward. This spring has obviously, you know, put us behind the 8 ball a little bit, and I think we have a surplus coming forward, and I know we need to be wary of future provincial funding, but if we utilize some of that funding, and because this life cycle extension hasn't got out to tender yet, there's an opportunity here to put some of that money in there, and I'm told that we can accommodate with that amount most of the roads that are on the list from Public Works that need to be rationalized, that need to be fixed up from this spring. So it should put a good dent in some of the work that's required. And then I thought after the tender's been awarded, we'll get a list of those roads so we can let our constituents know, you know, what's on that list, what's coming forward. So is there any questions? Councillor Elmsley, you had a question?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'm not opposed to this. I just want some clarification on a couple of things. Through you to staff, and I'm not sure whether it's Public Works or engineering. Life cycle extension, how long are we talking?
Mr. Farquhar?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, it depends on the road section and the treatment, but most of these are to try to tide over road sections that are outside the current 5-year plan.
So would we get 5 years in most cases?
Through you,
On
Mr.
an average road?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, that would be the idea, between 5 to 6 possibly, based on other certain conditions.
And is staff comfortable doing this, or would they prefer to take the money and do 2 roads permanently, or?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, so the idea with this, with the whole program, it's broken down into different subcategories, and what we're seeing the increase in is dealing with kind of localized issues from spring breakup, and hence the increase. If we took that money and just did 2 roads completely through our normal capital process, you're still going to have issues or operating cost issues with dealing with the existing spring breakup.
Yeah, I understand that. I'm just, what I'm hesitant about, the only thing I'm hesitant about is doing something temporarily. Like if we're going to get 5 years, that's pretty good, because redoing a road completely, you're probably going to get, what, 10 or 12 years. So it gives us an opportunity. And the only thing I don't want to do is do something that's going to last for a year and a half or 2 years, and then we're going to be right back into it again, and we should have fixed something permanently. So that was my only concern, and I don't know who, if anybody, wants to speak to that or say anything.
I'll get the director to respond. Go ahead.
Thank you, through you, Mr. Mayor. So this list is, we coordinated with Public Works on roads that had a high value of maintenance. So roads that have, are sort of past the maintenance cycle in small sections. So the alternative would be to patch the road, but it's just going to blow away. So you're essentially not maximizing your dollars. By putting a little bit of money in life cycle extension, you get that, say, 3 to 5 year window, but it saves on the operating costs. So in the end, you're ahead, even though it's short term.
And do you have any idea how many roads you can do with $700,000?
Through you, Mr. Mayor. So just for clarity, it's 700 or 800 additional dollars. So I think the total value of the program now is around 1.2 million. And we do have a list of roads. I'm not sure if Mike has the kilometers.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, no, I don't have the overall kilometers. But once again, it's sections of road with individual failure points, right? So that's why we're looking at the localized. So, areas between 100 meters to 200 meters within the overall road sections.
Thank you. Councillor Yeo, you're good? Thank you, sir. Okay, so we have a motion on the floor. Further questions? All in favor? That's passed. Thank you. Item 8 is a long-term financial plan update, which we're going to get from Jennifer Stover, Director of Corporate Services, and Adam Found, our Manager of Corporate Assets. Maybe just Adam Found.
Maybe just me for now, Mr. Mayor.
Good morning.
Good morning. Yeah, I believe that I'll be going first through a slide deck, and then at the end of my slide deck, I believe Director of Corporate Services will come up and finish things off. So I'll be largely building on the comments you heard earlier from the CAO regarding our long-term financial plan. And the outlook I want to give to council today is really capital oriented, although of course it's not exclusively related to capital. And in fact, as you're probably aware by now, you really can't separate operating and capital entirely. They really are linked. And so when you do talk about capital, you do necessarily have to talk about operating to some extent. So some of the themes I'll touch on today, there's really 4 of them. So of course our long-term financial plan, which goes out to 2027. I'll be looking at just roughly an overview of that to remind council what that was all about. Looking at some successes and challenges that we've experienced with that plan so far when we're now 2 years in. Implications of Bill 108, or otherwise known as the More Homes, More Choice Act, which received royal assent, I believe, on June 6th, so that is now law. And then finally, I'll finish off with an update on major capital grants. Some are ones that we typically get every year, and then others are new. So those would be good to talk about. So our long-term financial plan had a 10-year planning horizon. It was approved 2 years ago by council. And it was informed largely by our 2017 asset management plan, our 2015 DC study, the service master plans that were in place at that time, other sources of council direction, so whether it was a resolution from a report or a service level standard in a bylaw, those sorts of things, and then a general operating needs forecast. And taken all together, what that meant is that we brought forward and approved a long-term financial plan that was in alignment with our corporate strategic plan. And you may recall that, in fact, a 5 to 10-year budget strategy, which really is what the plan is an item in that corporate strategic plan. So it was good to be able to scratch off one of those items. So what's the plan designed to do? Well, there's a number of things. I won't touch on every single one of them, but I've listed a few of the more prominent ones. So really, first and foremost, is to guide the city towards financial independence and sustainability. It's also meant to phase in our financial capacity so that it can meet our needs based on the service levels approved by council. So when you take those first two sub-bullet points together, those really combine to echo the CAO's words that you heard earlier this morning, which is we want to have predictable, stable tax levy increases going into the future, and also water, wastewater rate increases going into the future. The plan's also meant to strategically allocate our financial capacity, not only across operating and capital needs, but also within those areas, operating and capital, and not only, of course, for 1 year, but across the long term, at least 10 years. So it really is a strategic document in that sense. It also serves as the financial strategy for our asset management plans. So part of the provincial requirements for asset management plans is that they contain, or at least are tied to, a financial strategy that supports the plan. The long-term financial plan serves that purpose. And lastly, it's meant to eliminate the infrastructure deficit, or sometimes called the infrastructure gap. And really what that is our annual gap between our financial capacity to support capital and the actual capital needs on an average annual basis. So some of the successes so far under the plan would be management of some major operating pressures over the last 2 years, so this year and last year, amounting to about $10.8 million. So that's actually, I'll talk a little bit later about how that number is a little higher than what was originally estimated. Unprecedented levels of capital investment, and especially in roads. So that's something I think that has been highlighted a number of times since the 2019 budget was proposed. Better than forecasted assessment growth, which has meant a higher tax levy than we would otherwise have, and better than forecasted water, wastewater revenue and user rate increases. So basically what that means is that we've actually had revenue come in a little higher than what we expected, and we've managed to keep user rate increases a little lower than expected. So we've sort of had a win-win situation there for water, wastewater, and really mostly that's due to conservative forecasting. And specifically, if you do dig into the detail of the plan, you'll see where that conservatism comes from. It really comes from assuming essentially no net growth in the water, wastewater user base, even though we know there will be that growth. And the reason for that assumption is that we also know that not only is there growth, but there's also conservation for the existing users. and those have offsetting effects. And so what we've assumed is that they completely offset each other. And what the data is now showing us is that, in fact, that assumption is quite conservative. So I think that's a good news story for us. So before I get into some of the challenges, I do want to reiterate something important when it comes to these sorts of plans. And that is that the idea is not to have zero deviation from what we plan to do. I think I've said a number of times with council, I would never bring you a plan that is set in stone because then that wouldn't be a plan. So a plan has to have some kind of flexibility to it. So the idea is to make sure our long-term financial plan is a guide and framework and not an inflexible prescription. And I think that's an important point to understand about these sorts of plans. And sort of the follow-up point to that is that the intent is about progress, not perfection. So again, the point is not to have zero deviation from the plan. But with that said, our progress has had some challenges, and I've listed three sources of these challenges. First and foremost probably is 2019 operating pressures, which were quite a bit larger than originally estimated 2 years ago. And that's by about 4.2 million. And largely, that's a result of the operating component of the plan requiring a little bit of work, a little bit more precision. And that's something that we're working on right now, and I expect will become part of the 2019 update to the long-term financial plan. Another source is unplanned capital projects. And I've listed just three here. This isn't an exhaustive list. Bobcaygeon Beach Park, the Ops Arena renewal, the electronic document and records management system, which is legislated. Those were not planned at all. And so we've absorbed those into capital budgets, and of course that has an impact. And lastly, sensitivity to the 4% tax increases that were planned for 2018 to 2021, so 4 years in a row of 4%. And we understand that there is sensitivity to that number, 4%. And we're again in the update to the financial plan, we're looking at trying to bring that number down and see if we can try to actually flatten out the tax increases for the long term. So in other words, instead of having tax increases step down, we're going to try to look for ways to try to just flatten them out for the long term and see if that's a possibility. So what have these challenges meant for the long-term financial plan? Well, they've really, and this goes back to my earlier comment about how operating and capital can't really be thought about in silos. They really do relate to one another. And in our particular case, the challenges have meant that our capital reserve isn't quite as strong as what we would like it to be at this point in time. And there's really two ways of measuring that. So the first sub-bullet point there refers to our annual contribution to the capital reserve. Right now, there's about a $3.6 million deficiency in that contribution compared to where we hope to be at this point in time. Another way to look at it is the balance in the reserve. What is that number at? And when we look at that, there's about a $5.3 million deficiency in the actual balance to the reserve. So that number is actually, even though it's bigger, that number is not as concerning because it's a static number. The annual number is the one to be more concerned about, which is the 3.6 million, because that's happening, if that number doesn't change, then that happens every single year, and that wouldn't be sustainable. So our update to the financial plan will have to address this in some way. So I don't want to be a Debbie Downer, as sometimes us financial folks are labeled as. While this is not excellent news, it's not something that we can't overcome. It is something we can overcome. It'll take some work. It'll take some adjustment to our long-term financial planning, but it can be done. When we come back to council, hopefully in September, to bring an updated financial plan to you to review, there's really three things that I envision us doing on the back end to help this plan be even better than what it is. The first thing would be to enhance that operating needs forecast, and I know my colleagues in corporate services are working diligently to enhance that forecast, make it more precise, and ultimately make it more accurate going out into the long term. And I know that involves a 5-year staffing plan, for instance. That would be part of that enhancement. Obviously, we're going to have to delay the building of our required capital reserve and capital financing capacity. So that means we probably won't be able to reach that desired level, that desired balance in our tax-supported capital reserve at the time we thought we could in 2027. Maybe that will be pushed out a couple of years. And also our total capital financing capacity in general, which includes the reserve. Trying to get that capacity level up to where it needs to be will likely have to be delayed to some extent. And the other thing that we're looking to do to help make the plan a more viable document is to level those forecasted tax increases to around the 3% mark. So when we look back to 2018 and 2019, you take the average of those tax increases, which would be 3.25% and 2.85%, you're looking at roughly a 3% tax increase on average. And so if that's sort of the direction that council finds advisable, then that's something that we're going to do our very best to try to reflect in the update to the plan. So I don't want to speak too much for my colleagues to the right here. That's more their domain, but they can certainly follow up to that if they like. So now I'll shift over to Bill 108 and what it might mean, or what it does mean, based on what information we have today to our municipality. As I mentioned, it became law on June 6th, so this sort of echoes the corporate service director's comments that there's still a lot of change unfolding as time marches on, and so we're doing our very best to stay on top of those changes and keep council up to date. So the bill largely affects the Planning Act and the DC Act, among other acts. But the amendments to the Planning Act and DC Act are what's most relevant to municipalities. So if you look at the last two sub-bullet points, the first of those refers to the soft service DCs. So those are services such as parks, libraries, airport, housing. All those things are actually now pulled out of the DC Act. So those are services that are no longer eligible for DCs. What has happened, though, is on the Planning Act side, the province has introduced what's called a Community Benefits Charge, or a CBC, not to be confused with the Broadcasting Corporation. So a CBC is a Community Benefits Charge, which is now under the Planning Act. And the idea is that the growth-related capital costs for those soft services will now be collected under that cost recovery regime. The issue is that we don't really know exactly how that looks right now. A lot is left to be defined in the regulations. The last sub-bullet point there talks about some issues that that Bill 108 introduces into the DC Act in terms of restricting how applicable DC rates are. So, for example, expanding the class of exemptions that are legislated, so we don't have a choice, and also in terms of delaying and compromising our collection of DCs. One of the elements in that vein is the fact that for certain types of development, payments of DCs will now be spread over 6 years. And those payments would be based on whatever the DC rate was at the time that development application was made. So of course you can see how that's going to put some pressure on municipalities. So Watson and Associates, who are consultants for development charges, they've issued a letter to the province. That letter indicates that about 20% of DC recoveries or DC revenue will be lost to the average single-tier municipality as a result of these changes. And of course, the response from the province is, well, you have this new CBC that you can use to make up the revenue. The issue is that the structure, the adequacy, the effectiveness of this CBC, we don't know what that is. Again, a lot is left to the regulations to define, and our understanding from the province is that it will engage in consultations with municipalities to help shape those regulations, but again, we have no way of predicting what ultimately will come out of those negotiations. Rules for transition from soft service DCs to CBCs. We're told that we should expect those this summer. Again, we don't know for sure if they will come out this summer, and we certainly don't know what they will look like. So we are in constant communication with Watson and Associates and with the province, trying to stay on top of all these changes. It really is a dramatically shifting landscape when it comes to, excuse me, when it comes to the recovery of growth-related costs. So I thought I would share with you some responses that have gone out there in terms of how the municipal sector is responding to Bill 108. So Marianne Mead Ward, who's the mayor of Burlington, says Bill 108 will have a devastating impact on municipal finances and local land use plan and control. Growth will pay even less of the cost of growth, leaving taxpayers to make up the difference. Cam Guthrie, who's the chair of the Large Urban Mayors Caucus and also the mayor of Guelph, says cities will be forced to consider increasing taxes or fees, cutting services, raiding reserves, or deferring infrastructure and capital projects. And I thought I would include these because I do believe they're a fair reflection of the pressures that municipalities are going to feel as a result of these changes. And it goes to highlight how important it is that the CBC framework, the new framework for soft services, is structured. That the way that that's structured will be very important. So now I'm going to end on a more positive note, because now I get to talk about our capital grant situation, which overall has improved. And so there'll be a number of grants that I'll talk about here, and certainly if you have any questions about any specific grant, I can try to provide you more details about it. So the first one I have on the list is the Ontario Community Infrastructure Fund, or OCIF, sometimes it's referred to. This is an allocation-based annual capital grant introduced in 2016. In fact, it was introduced earlier, but not as an allocation-based grant, but as an application-based only. And our allocation for 2019 is about $1.8 million. And for 2020 and beyond, that allocation was supposed to increase to about $2 million, but the province has indicated that will not happen. It will freeze our allocation at the 2019 level. So we're going to have to make an adjustment for that $200,000 difference in our update to the long-term financial plan. And where does this money go? Well, typically we take the entire amount and allocate it to rural resurfacing, the rural resurfacing capital program, which you were discussing a little bit earlier this morning. The provincial gas tax fund. So as you probably all are aware, that is transit dedicated. It comes in each year from the province based on ridership and population. And it can be used for operating or capital or both. In terms of the transit service. Our allocation for 2019 is almost $600,000, and that was actually expected to double in about 5 years, but again, the province has indicated that won't occur, and that we should expect the current allotment to prevail, at least until we hear otherwise. What do we do with this money? Well, we spend almost half of it typically on bus replacements, transit shelter or stop upgrades, things of that nature when it comes to capital, and then the rest is used for operating. The federal gas tax fund, so not to be confused with the provincial gas tax fund, it's a totally different grant. This is an annual capital grant that's allocated based purely on population, so there's no other factor that goes into this calculation. Our 2019 allocation is $4.576 million, and it's to increase to almost $4.8 million in 2021 and almost $5 million in 2023. and that's due to indexation that will occur over those years. As I'm sure you're aware, Canada has doubled the 2019 allocation on a one-time basis, and I just want to emphasize those words that I've underlined. It's doubled, which is great news for you, but it's a one-time doubling. So we're not going to get this extra revenue every year. It's just for this year. And I understand, and perhaps my colleagues to the right can confirm, we have actually received this money yet. No, it's committed, but not yet received. So that would be about $4.6 million of unplanned grant money that would be available for capital projects. So what do we usually do with this money? Typically, it goes entirely to the urban rural reconstruction program. Often that program exceeds $5 million, so it typically is able to absorb the entirety of this grant. So this is a good time where I'm going to mention there's a table I want to show you that relates to that third sub-bullet point there. And I think I'll just wait till I get to the last of my slides before I bring up that table. But I just wanted you to keep this second last sub-bullet point in your mind because it does relate to a memo that the mayor has on the agenda. Now we're into some grants that are new. So the Investing in Canada Infrastructure Program, or sometimes called ICIP, has a number of streams. I think there's about 4 streams in that program. And so first on the list is the rural stream, or sometimes northern and rural stream. This is a one-time competitive application-based capital grant for northern and rural Ontario municipalities. This was released earlier this year. It's targeted toward transportation infrastructure, but primarily roads and bridges. It can be used for airport and marina infrastructure, but when you read the program guide, it's pretty clear that the primary focus is really on roads and bridges and on strengthening Canada's transportation network. Canada and Ontario will fund up to 83 1/3% of eligible capital costs, up to a $5 million cap. And we have submitted our application for the 2019 intake. There will be future intakes, but for 2019, we have submitted the Colborne Street Bridge and the Colborne Street West reconstruction, which are going to happen over a period, or at least they're planned for, a period of 2020 to 2024. So obviously not in 1 year because those are very large projects, but certainly they're planned for that time frame. Sticking with the same grant program, but a different stream, we're looking at now at the transit stream. That's a one-time allocative application-based capital grant. So let me back up to the previous slide. So the previous stream was a one-time competitive application-based grant. This one's a one-time allocative. So what does that mean? It means in this stream, the province and the federal government set aside a maximum amount of money for the city. So that money is reserved for the city. It's about $1.7 million. And then we're to apply to use up that funding. So for the interim, that money's locked in for us, and all we need to do is apply for projects that are eligible for that money, and then the province and the federal government will tell us whether those projects are approved or not. So that's what I mean by allocative. We don't have to compete for that $1.7 million. It is for us. We just have to make sure we apply, the projects we apply for are eligible. So under this program, there's a focus on obviously transit, but also active transportation infrastructure, facilities, and equipment. Canada and Ontario will fund up to 73 1/3% of eligible capital costs, subject to that maximum funding limit of $1.7 million that I noted earlier. So we have submitted a multi-pronged project, which I've described as a transit improvement and expansion project. Really what that includes is obviously some expansion of Lindsay Transit to new developments, such as the one that should occur soon on Colborne Street West, and also other enhancements to the transit service. So whether that's adding bike racks to buses or adding other infrastructure to our transit stops to enhance them, adding buses to the fleet, adding transit stops to the network, all those things are included in this project. And you'll see there it takes place over a 6-year period, 2020 to 2025. So that's one thing I should mention about this program, this ISIP program, is generous in the sense that it doesn't require us to do these projects all in 1 year. We're able to spread the work out over multiple years, and in fact, up to a decade if we want to, which is great because that lets us tackle these projects as we have capacity to do so, and it's great for the government because then that means it's not having to fork out all the cash up front. So I think it's kind of a win-win situation there. Yep, the next one is the Ontario Connect and Links program. So this is purely provincial capital grant, which is one-time, competitive, and application-based, but it's only for municipalities that have a Connect and Link. So what's a Connect and Link? A Connect and Link is a designated section of municipal road that connects two provincial highways. So the key word there is designated. So it has to be designated by the province as a Connect and Link. There's only 77 municipalities that have such a Connect and Link, or more than one. And we're one of those 77 municipalities. Under this program, Ontario will fund up to 90% of eligible capital costs subject to a $3 million cap. So the city has submitted the King Street resurfacing and downtown Omemee reconstruction project for this grant. That would happen over 2019 to 2021. The reason why 2019 shows up in there is because we do have an approved design project right now from 2018 where no money has yet been spent on that design, so we can include that design in this application, even though it's already been budgeted. So you might ask, well, why Omemee? Well, the answer is really simple. It's our only Connect and Link. So it's really the only thing we can apply for under this program. So this is for the 2019 intake. Our expectation is that there will be future intakes if we're not successful this time, but really all we can do under this capital grant program is to just reapply for the same project over and over and over again. And that's what we've been doing for the past couple of years. So now I'll circle back to the Invested in Canada Infrastructure Program, or ISIP, because there are some streams that are not yet released, and I do want to just make council aware that they're coming. The first is the Community, Culture, and Recreation stream, which will interest our Director of Community Services. We don't really know what that will look like yet. We just don't know, but we're staying on top of it, and we will certainly let council know as soon as we do. The Green Infrastructure stream, so that's another stream that is expected to come out under this grant. The title kind of gives you an idea as to what it's about. And we're expecting that both those streams will come out later this year, probably Q3, Q4, in terms of, based on what we've heard from the federal government. So we do plan to apply for these two streams to the extent we're eligible to, and we'll certainly keep council up to date on that. So this would be a good point where I'm going to go back a couple of slides to the federal gas tax fund. And again, I want to revisit that second last bullet point there, where we're talking about the doubling of the gas tax fund. And so there is a memo on the agenda from the mayor, which is asking council to consider earmarking $2 million, or up to $2 million of that extra $4.6 million that we're being allocated, and to use that to essentially advance capital projects that are already in our long-term plan. And the reason why I want to elaborate on this a little bit is because while that will be beneficial in the sense that it's money that we didn't account on having before, I want to caution council that doesn't translate into, well, then we should have a 2% less tax increase, because it being $2 million, or roughly 2%, it's more like 1.8% now. And I want to show you why those two things are not the same. So there's a table that should come up very shortly. That will show you why those two things are not the same. So if you can maximize that, magnify it. Just a little smaller. So what this table shows is the 10-year impact of having a $2 million reduction to a planned tax increase for 2020. So the first column shows the year, going out 10 years, and the next column shows the incremental tax levy deficiency. So that's the immediate impact. You reduce the tax increase by $2 million in that year. Then the annual impact is the same because there's no years prior to that where that impact has an effect. And then the cumulative column is also the same in that row, again, because there are no prior years. So if you just look at 2020, then you're looking at a 1.76% corrective tax increase, in the sense if we wanted to make up that $2 million loss in that year, it would just be a 1.76% tax increase. But then look at what happens as you go down the years. So if we don't do anything else and we just continue on with, let's say, 3% tax increases every year, then what you see in that annual column is the annual loss grows by 3% every year. And then what you see in the cumulative column, that keeps track of all the losses started in 2020, indexed by that 3% every year. And so that's why the title of that column is cumulative. It truly is cumulative. It's the total sum over all the years up to that point of all the tax levy deficiencies. And when you get to the end of 10 years, you're at almost $30 million of lost revenue. That's lost financial capacity to meet the service levels that our financial plan is supposed to meet. And then if you look at that final column, which is probably the scariest one, you're looking at a 20% tax increase in that year to correct for that. So while it might, in 2020, while that $2 million might not look like a whole lot in terms of a tax increase avoidance, what it does, though, is accumulate into a very large problem down the road. And if you wanted to correct that problem all in 1 year, 10 years down the road, that's going to cost us a 20% tax increase just for that. That's not accounted for any other pressures that might be there. And so this is a table which I think is instructive because it highlights the difference between a one-time impact and an annual impact. So the gas tax grant that we've received on top, which has now been doubled, that's a one-time impact. We're not going to get that every year. And so to compensate for that by making a change to what is something that is annual, which is our tax levy, that is an ill-advised approach, because you're going to end up with this kind of problem if that occurs. So I just wanted to point out for council, again, the difference between a one-time impact and the annual impact. And this relates to capital budget deliberations that occurred for 2019. You'll recall what council decided to do is to remove the aerial truck, or one of our aerial trucks, from the fire fleet entirely. So not just from the budget, but just remove it from the fleet entirely, which meant that we avoided a capital cost of about $1.43 million. And the sentiment was, well, then that means we have $1.4 million of tax room we could just reduce from the tax increase. That's not true. That is patently false. Why? Because what happened is we had a one-time cost avoidance. If you reduce the tax levy increase by $1.4 million, you're reducing that $1.4 million forever, for every year going into the future. So that's $1.4 million this year. That's $1.4 million next year, indexed by 3%. That's $1.4 million the year after that, indexed by 3%. And you see, that's the difference. And so I just want to caution council when making those decisions, and it's not that those decisions are wrong, it's just that you don't want to use that rationale for making those decisions. If you're going to decrease the planned tax increase, it has to be on some other basis. It shouldn't be on the basis of a one-time change that's made elsewhere in our financial portfolio. So I think that concludes my part, Mr. Mayor, and I think Director Stover will finish things off. I'll just get you to your spot.
Yeah, that's a lot of information. So let's see if there's any questions on that. I have a couple. Let's get a motion.
You might be okay for a while.
So what is the second part of this? Is the director's presentation? So same presentation?
So same presentation, just talking about the one-time funding that we have received. what
Okay, so
resolutions
we'll
council's
receive it
made
all
to
at the
date.
same time, but let's see if there's any questions on that. So I've got a couple here, but me first.
You're up.
So I'm confused as to why you're tying the $2 million from my memo into a $2 million reduction in the tax levy. Because that, to me, those are two totally separate things. Your last statement there said if we reduce it by 2 million, here's the cumulative effect. But my memo coming up in the future is for a one-time payment we're getting of 4.6 million. So to me, they're two totally separate things. Where am I going wrong there?
Through you to you, Mr. Mayor, you're correct. They are two separate things. The reason why I used the $2 million is because I was hearkening back to the capital budget deliberations that occurred earlier this year. And what I wanted to do is prevent council from thinking that just because using that $2 million out of the 4.6 million means we'll be relieved of $2 million of future costs, which is beneficial to the city. I just didn't want council to then make the leap from that to then suggesting that, well, then that means we can just automatically reduce the planned tax increase by $2 million. That's the only reason. It has nothing to do with the merit of your memo at all. It just has to do with a potential jump, avoiding a potential jump from your memo to something else that would not be good financial sense for the city.
But by accelerating anything up in our program forward, it's reducing pressures down the road.
I agree it does.
I'm not saying it results in a 2% decrease, but it is reducing future pressures because we're moving projects forward with a one-time funding allocation, correct?
You're absolutely correct, but it reduces those pressures on a one-time basis. And that's the point I
we got one-time
want to
funding
make.
to do it, so that matches. Okay,
That's
I got a
right.
couple other questions. Councillor Elmsley, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Through you, Adam, thanks for the presentation. I think I have a lot of numbers rolling around in my head. I wanted to go back to DCs, and with Bill 108, I don't know if when we were told that the deficit for DCs at the end of 2019 or 2020 would probably hit $10 million, whether that took into account Bill 108 or if Bill 108 is going to cause that to be higher or more.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, it's a great question, and I really wish I could answer it. The issue is that we don't know what the regulations will look like. And so that means, first of all, we don't know if the community benefits charge will be a net zero replacement for soft service DCs. We really don't know that right now. The other thing we don't know is how will we transition from soft service DCs to a CBC. So we really don't, we have some indication, but we really don't know enough to know how the phase out of our current DC bylaw will actually occur and how that will impact the DC reserve. And just one example of something we really don't know is what about existing projects right now, like Bogcajun Beach Park, which is using some DC reserve money. We don't know how those projects will be treated. We don't know, will they be able to continue to use those monies? When we look at the DC reserve broken up into separate accounts by service, there's a Parks and Recreation line. If there's a big deficit in that line, we don't know what will happen with that deficit. Will that be translatable over to the community benefits charge? We just don't know right now. Or will it be stuck there and it'll have to be recovered through other DCs? We just don't know.
And through you again, will the Northwest Trunk and what's outstanding there, will that be affected at all?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, not at all to our knowledge. That project is being cost recovered through a capital charge, which is entirely different legislation. That legislation hasn't changed. And so Bill 108 really has no bearing on that project or its cost recovery.
And currently in our DC bylaws, we allow community projects like community housing a holiday on DCs. Is that going to be affected? Are housing corporation going to be now hit with DCs because of the changes?
It's a good question. So through you, Mr. Mayor. There is some bearing that Bill 108 has on what we'll just generally call affordable housing, whether it's provided by us directly or provided by the private sector. That sort of housing will benefit by certain new provisions in the DC Act that defer DC payments over 6 years, as I mentioned to you earlier. So that would be legislated, but my understanding is that it doesn't go so far as to grant an exemption necessarily to that type of housing, but we do have an exemption in our current bylaw, which is discretionary. And so if council continues with that discretionary exemption, then nothing would change for affordable housing, or at least municipal housing, which I understand has a slightly different definition. We're going to look at reconciling those two definitions. Again, so I think the answer to your question would be answered by council when it goes to adopt the new DC bylaw, whether that exemption will continue or not, or what form will that exemption continue in.
Well, that was basically my question. Will it be council's decision, or is the province dictating something different?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, in terms of a flat-out exemption, I believe that is the municipality's call. That's council's call. But in terms of the mandatory 6-year deferral of DCs for that type of housing, that's legislated. So we wouldn't have a choice in that case.
And lastly, on your slide with the table.
Oh, I'll have to let.
I agree with your philosophy on the $2 million. What I don't see in there is there's an additional $2.6 million, and the $2 million, if it's used to bring projects forward, take pressures off the years so that presumably you're doing more of the projects that you're planning for future years, so you could take them out of the budget altogether if you ran into this sort of scenario. So I'm not sure that what we don't lose on the swings we make up for in the roundabouts.
Well, through you, Mr. Mayor, maybe I could just clarify a little bit. So let's say we actually went out, let's just go all the way. Let's just say we took the whole $4.6 million and just used it right now to accelerate $4.6 million worth of projects. What that does then is it's true, you're correct in that it takes $4.6 million of pressure out of the plan in terms of cost. But it does so on a one-time basis. So it doesn't give us annualized cost pressure relief. It just gives us one-time relief. And so what I'm simply trying to say with this table is we don't want to mix the two types of relief up. So if the province came to us and said, hey, guess what? We're going to give you now, from this year going forward, every year we're going to give you $2 million, then this table wouldn't apply. But because the province and the federal government have come forward and said, we're going to give you one-time funding, then what I'm trying to impress upon council is that this table does apply, because we don't want to try to have an offsetting decision made on an annual basis. So I agree with you in principle, yes, $4.6 million now of unplanned revenue lets us ease the pressure of $4.6 million in terms of capital costs down the road, but only on a one-time basis. I hope that makes sense.
It makes some sense. I have to sit down and come up with that conclusion myself. Thank you.
Just going to ask, go ahead.
Yeah, through you, Mr. Mayor. Yeah, I think it is important to clarify it just in terms of the financial strategies. I think maybe the number that's missing, to give you some context, one of the slides talked about a $50 million annual capital program. So look at it from that perspective and do the simple math. $500 million would be our 10-year capital plan. This is the projects we want to afford. These are the projects we want to do. Now look at it from this perspective. If you take the $2 million one time, it goes from $500 million to a pot of $498 million. And then you're going to have to cost it accordingly over 10 years. Versus if it's annual and predictive, then it goes down year over year, every year. And again, I think it is important. I think in terms of what's being recommended, both on the previous decision that you made and the upcoming one, what you don't want to do is apply this to unknown spending or anything that's even planned. Now you're not influencing anything. But in the resolution that's upcoming, the $2 million does provide that one-time relief. But again, you don't want to arbitrarily reduce the overall annual financing because you can see the cumulative effect of that. So I hope that helps.
Let's move on. Councillor Dunn?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Through you to Adam. I tend to agree with Councillor Elmsley, but I haven't got my calculator or my pad of paper in front of me, so I can't argue with you right now. And besides that, I agree with the extra spending not affecting the tax rate. I agree with that principle anyway, so it'd be a nice argument we could have someday over a coffee. Anyway, moving on. Through your series of slides, you mentioned funding that's available from the federal government that's coming up, and you listed about 4 or 5 of them. So
Yep.
my question is that a promise or is that etched in stone? And what I'm going to get at, if we have an election coming up in October, that may change the dynamics of the federal government. Is all that stuff flushed down the drain, or, well, it's a new government, it's a minority government, it's whatever. So is that etched in stone funding, or is it this is what they're saying today?
Well, through you, Mr. Mayor, of course, I don't think anybody can make a firm prediction either way and be absolutely sure about it. What I can do is point to past practice. And we know that when large grant, so if I just go to the ISIP, one of the ISIP streams, so investing in Canada infrastructure programs. So we know when large programs like this that come out, and they're not a 1-year deal, they're a 10-year deal. We tend to see, at least from the federal government's perspective, the federal government honor these programs. So when it came to the predecessor to this program, which was the Building Canada Fund, I believe it was called, that program went through multiple elections and really stayed the course. So if we were to just base our prediction on past performance, I think it's probably more likely than not that this program will remain in place despite the election coming up this fall. And that would be my prediction, although I can't be 100% sure.
Okay, that's fair. That's
yeah,
fair.
but what I can say is that I think in terms of the streams that are out now, so this rural and northern stream and then this transit stream, which we've now applied for, I think it's safe to say that those are pretty well locked in. I can't see a renege on at least those. So at least in terms of the ones we've applied for, I'm fairly confident that those will remain in place after this election.
Okay, so going back to 14 just for a moment, then we'll come back to 15.
Yep.
So going back to 14, my question would be is we have got an active bridge building program on right now. We're doing the studies, we're meeting with people. We're going to build a bridge for Feldman Falls someplace up around Coboconk or something like that, but whatever. Why are we talking about building a bridge on Colburn Street when we've actually got an active program in place that we're trying to do something about?
Through you, Mr. Mayor. Well, as you may recall, I believe it was in 2015, Council specifically approved Colburn Street as the location for the second east-west crossing of the Scugog River. And so that location has been determined by Council. There was an EA done, I'm sure you're aware of all this, but I'll just share it anyway. There was an EA done by Victoria County back in 2000 that selected this as the most appropriate location. It was then reconfirmed in Transportation Master Plan in 2011. It was then reconfirmed in the 2014-15 corridor study that was done for Colburn Street. So every single report or study that has been done on this issue has pointed to this location as being the most appropriate one, and then Council of course, ultimately has selected this location. So we've made our plans based on that direction. So this location has been studied to death, so I would suggest to you that's why it's not being studied yet again. And then to your question about the bridge program, that program is really largely for existing bridges. This bridge does not exist yet.
And neither is the one crossing wherever it's going to cross up in Fountain Falls, which in my opinion is a far more urgent project, because I truly honestly believe that someday that bridge at the falls is going to fail us and we're going to be up the creek. Decent memory, and I remember that conversation, and during the conversation when we were kibitzing back and forth, and you know, it was 16, so the 16 of us kibitzing back and forth, was it was all about development charges, and we'd gone through a development charge phase, and the developers at that point had raised some sort of issues that a bridge up at Thunder Bridge was substantially more expensive. We wanted to start charging development charges for a bridge, so we thought to find a balance that we would talk about putting it across Colbert Street so the cost would be lower, more acceptable to the developers at that time. But when the time actually came to build a bridge, as long as we built a bridge, it really didn't matter where we built the bridge. And that was the actual conversation that took place. Still doesn't rectify, or just still doesn't answer the question, is there's an urgent need for a bridge in Fountain Falls, in my opinion. And I think it's a generally shared opinion by the people in Fountain Falls and the ones that live north of the bridge. So I just don't understand why we're zeroing in so much on a bridge that is somewhat controversial, and not focusing on an actual need for the city. But anyway, that's a conversation. Anyway, back to 15.
Okay.
We talk about the transit improvement. Now, I noticed, and there's two questions I got with that particular thing. During your conversation or during your presentation, you mentioned the Colburn Street, Lake Lindsay, whenever they fill that in, and so on. We have an active community up around it's now called Springdale Drive and Alcorn, and I received all kinds of questions, when are we going to get the transit? And it's a valid question. My issue there, of course, is number one, I think we need transit up there, so I agree with them there. It's also outside the old footprint, the area rated part of the Lindsay transit, which is paid for by Lindsay. So once again, why are we addressing a community that doesn't exist, that may not exist for several years to come, and not concentrating on communities that do exist that are actually asking for a service?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, I'll do my best to respond. I may have to defer part of the answer to the Director of Public Works. I really can't speak for why transit has not expanded to the area you referred to, Springdale, that area north of Lindsay. It's true that the development, which is ongoing right now in that area, will physically link, eventually, physically link Springdale to Lindsay, and there will be one continuous urban area through that larger area. And I don't know what the plans are necessarily in terms of timing of expanding transit that way. You are correct that if the current model were to be preserved in terms of area rating, you would expect the area rated boundaries to be adjusted to accommodate that. Again, that would be a council decision. I think the rest of this bronze I'll have to defer to Director of Public Works.
Through you, Mr. Mayor. So the expansion of transit, as currently planned, primarily we're focusing outlines within our transit master plan, defines timing expectations within the community. I am aware of several requests for expansion into the Springdale area. The manager of transit and fleet is working within the requirements there to ensure adequate infrastructure. When we get into planning of those routes. It obviously requires changes in timing and service delivery implications for other areas. So is it a matter of trying to achieve that 1 hour cycle time, or are we going to see expansion there? So there's a number of factors in there within that expansion, but I know it's planned and under review as we speak.
Yeah. Thank you for those comments, and I agree with you. But what my issue is part of the reason why we get into financial problems is we plan for something down the road when we're not dealing with the issues that are directly in front of us. And I have no problem with long-range planning. But I think when things like transit grants come up and bridge grants come up and roads grants come up, that we should look first at where we have issues and where we have emergencies before we start to worry about, well, let's do this. You know, let's build a new structure because we've got some extra money, so let's build something new. And I have a problem with government in general for doing this. They're always announcing new programs and not looking after the old programs, and I would like to see that we don't go down that road. And those are just comments. I don't expect a response.
Thank you. Councillor Ashmore.
You too, Adam. In the beginning of your presentation, you mentioned this term, and I'm still not sure what it means. If you could sort of give the layman's version of it, static deficiency. And you said if things fluctuate $2 million, that's not the first thing. It's static deficiency.
I'm sorry. What do you know a slide number?
I was at the beginning there, but you said it was static deficiency, and I'm not sure what that means. I'm pretty sure it was in the beginning of the presentation. And you said there was a variation of $2 million. Okay, I think under a deficiency of about 5.3 million in the 2019 balance, then you mentioned the word, I think I just wrote it down, static deficiency. There's a variation of $2 million. Could you sort of explain that?
Yeah, through you, Mr. Mayor, I think I know what you might be referring to. Is the difference? So we're talking about two different deficiencies here regarding the capital reserve. So one deficiency is, well, what should the balance in the reserve be versus what it actually is, or what it's actually projected to be in any given year. So that's static in the sense that it's not an annual figure, right? It's a static figure. Pick a given point in time, and at that point in time, you can know what the balance is in that reserve. The other type of deficiency is a flow or an annual deficiency. So in this context, that refers to the annual contribution to the capital reserve. That's that first number there, 3.6 million. And so the way you get that number is to look at, well, what's the actual contribution versus what was planned for any given year, and then what's the difference? And the difference is going to give you that deficiency, right? So I think that's the difference between a static deficiency and an annual deficiency.
Okay, so it varies every year about $2 million depending on internal and external factors. So you can't really predict then each year. You could have a variation of $2 million in your deficits.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, I'm not sure where you're getting $2 million from. I don't see that number on here.
The 3.6 to the 5.3, I think you mentioned roughly $2 million.
Yeah, the difference in terms of subtracting one number from the other has no meaning here. That number doesn't mean anything. You really have to look at the two numbers separately. So of course, they do relate though. The higher the 3.6 is, so the higher your annual deficiency, then of course the higher your reserve balance deficiency will be, right? If you're putting less into the reserve than you should, then of course you should expect your balance to be lower than what it should be. But what could change, let's say the 5.3 is, let's say there was a one-time grant and the province said, here's $10 million and you can put it in your capital reserve. Well, that will fix the second number. That would fix that deficiency, right? But it's not going to fix your annual deficiency. And I think that's the distinction I'm trying to impress.
Clear as mud, right?
Yeah.
So are we in better financial shape since we've implemented our long-term financial plan, or worse?
We're in much better shape.
Thank you. You want to go ahead, Director, finish off the presentation?
Sure. So I'll be quick. The purpose of the last few slides is really just to reconfirm the previous decision of council. So as Adam alluded to, we've got some one-time funding that's come through from the federal and provincial government. It is one time, and it totals about $5.6 million. We've got the federal gas tax money that Adam spoke to. It's the one-time infusion of 4.66. We haven't received the money yet, but we do have a letter confirming that it's coming. Just for confirmation, although typically we use gas tax funding for roads, this is the long list of municipal services that the funding could be used for. So things like roads and bridges, but it also includes water and wastewater and solid waste and sports, recreation, culture, tourism. So on April 23rd, 2019, this was the resolution that council passed, and that we put that money into the federal gas tax reserve, and that we'd report back at a future date on how best to use those funds. And I believe the mayor has a comment to make on that, so I won't add anything further to that. We also got some money under the provincial small and rural municipalities grant. This again was one-time funding of $725,000. And those funds, although they were unconditional, they did put some parameters around it, and is for us to become more efficient and to reduce expenditure growth. So specifically, they're suggesting we use it for things like service delivery reviews, development of shared service agreements, and some capital investments. We have put some, so here's the resolution. Again, the $725,000 was transferred to the contingency reserve, and that staff would report back again on how best to use those funds. So staff has put some thoughts together on some opportunities where we could use that funding. Top of mind was EOWC is doing a review of paramedic services. There's a paramedic master plan that needs to be updated. Adam spoke about Bill 108. There's obviously going to be some significant financial impacts of that. We don't know what those are yet, but we may want to invest some funds in doing a review of that. And then there's also just to do an audit of our financial business processes. Are there things we could be doing more efficiently that could drive better revenues, things like that? So staff would propose a recommendation that the Chief Administrative Officer be authorized to commit up to $75,000 from the contingency reserve. So out of that $725,000 we received, we'd be looking to commit $75,000 of that for some initiatives that are aligned with the purpose of the funding, and would likely be for some of the things mentioned on the previous slide. And then finally, the province also granted about $225,000 related to the legalization of cannabis, and recognizing that there would be some potential impacts to the municipality around enforcement, public health, things of that nature. Again, on April 23rd, council approved that we put that money into a deferred revenue and just hold on to it. Staff at this point has no definitive plans for it. However, as we come forward with the 2020 budget, there may be some of these funds recommended for use for some bylaw enforcement support. And I believe that's it.
Thank you. Questions? Councillor Elmsley?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Through you. On that $725,000, could we use, we're going to be faced with a charge at some point in time for broadband expansion. Could it be used as the city's portion of that if we chose to do that? Or is that outside the parameters?
So if I could, Mr. Mayor, through you, for the $725,000, it would not be eligible. Broadband was listed in the previous grant. I think it was the one-time $4.6 million, if I'm not mistaken, federal gas tax. That may be eligible, but certainly the 725 is very specific to service and financial audits and efficiency reviews.
Well, maybe I'm extending the boundaries a little, but I see broadband upgrades as being more efficient. That it would certainly be helpful, not only to ourselves, but to practically everyone in the community to do things faster. And so I just wondered if it was specifically excluded or it just doesn't fit into it at all.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, I would suggest for the 725, it's explicitly excluded.
Excluded? Okay.
Yes, because it's a capital investment and that's not what it's intended. It's meant to be for review, specific or study or audits that lead to efficiencies.
Okay,
So a study on broadband expansion may be eligible
okay.
if it had some financial parameters around it as well. But that's already in play.
Okay. My next and last question is on the 225,000 for cannabis. Can that be used in either the OPP or Lindsay rate stabilization police funding?
It could certainly be used for support for policing as it relates to cannabis.
I think it would just have to be justified from the police. What are your increased costs as a result of the cannabis? And I think they're struggling to find any increased costs at this point. But it is part of the work plan, I know, from the Police Services Board, that they're looking at that as that rolls out. But as of to date, there's been nothing, extensive that they would apply to that funding for. You can't just apply it. It has to be showing.
I just wondered if down the road, should we ever get.
Yep, they know we have it. They know we have it, and they know it's available for that and several other things. But as at this point, there's nothing it can be allocated to.
Thank you.
Okay. Councillor Dunn?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Just a couple of questions. I noticed on your first part of the presentation for the $75,000, you were talking there about paramedic services and a paramedic master plan. Now, while I like the idea of that, we're going to a brand new system. I suspect that the paramedic service at some point, the 10 paramedic services are going to be tied in somewhere along the line to the 10 LIN services that are going to be coming down the road. So, and the 10 health units, I think it's all going to become a package. So I guess on that particular item, is this good money after bad? Like, are we spending money before we know what the new rules are? Are we spending money finding efficiencies in an old service when that old service is certainly going to change at some level or some design?
Yeah.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, so for the first bullet point, so the Eastern Ontario Wardens Caucus collectively and the Eastern Ontario Mayor's Caucus passed resolutions to do a review of the Eastern Ontario paramedic services in order to influence or put forward recommendations to the government on those structural changes. Okay. So in the early days, I'll say, or the first phase, it will be a nominal contribution across the board, but we wanted to highlight it to you. I think it's money well spent, at least looking at the overall service and defining it and the parameters around it. The second bullet, talking about paramedic master planning, we would be proposing that in a subsequent year. So you'll see that in the 2020 budget once we know better what the parameters and the legislation are and where we're heading. And then I think it will be money well spent because it will be then quantifying and planning for the new service moving forward.
All right. And I guess my second question is, and it only became up because of Councillor Elmsley's cannabis question, watching many news items from Peterborough recently, could this money or some of this money be spent in establishing safe injection sites? Because although we may not have a cannabis-related issue with our policing services, I know for a fact, certainly in Peterborough and from people I've talked here, we do have an opioid related policing issue, and could something possibly, as far as studies, et cetera, be done on that line?
Through you, Mr. Mayor. I don't believe it's eligible. Great point. I think we will follow up and look into it, but this was specific to sort of one-time transitional funding in 2 phases, mainly if you were a host community. And so you'll recall we passed the original host community resolution. We just haven't had a retail store open locally. So it really was focused on the rollout of that new program, but certainly I think it's one that we'd like to raise because we're really not seeing it in the early days being applicable. We're not a host right now. And other than partnering with other jurisdictions like was mentioned, or other service delivery agents, it would really be for education only. So maybe this is a way to go.
Councillor Ashmore?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Through you to Jennifer, I have a question here. It was to do with the 75,000, and it was that the CAO be authorized to commit up to 75,000 from the contingency reserve for initiatives that support the modernization of service delivery or result in reduced costs. I'm just wondering why we need to pull $75,000 when we already have the Office of Strategic Management, who's found $8 million of savings, not just cash, but service-related savings. Like, why are we needing this extra $75,000 when we've already found $8 million in savings through our presentation that we had a few months ago, or a month ago, through the Office of Strategic Management?
So through the mayor, the province has given us $725,000 to find efficiencies. So we are suggesting these 4 projects are things that we see as adding value that may be done in conjunction with the Office of Strategy Management, but that we'll be looking for some outside professional help with. And so that's why the $75,000 is being requested.
I just want to add through you, Mr. Mayor, that you heard in the presentation, honestly, the big wild card coming up into the fall is going to be this shift in development charges and Bill 108. And what does that mean then shifting back in terms of a burden on the tax rate? You know that there's a task force that is, the sleeves are rolled up and they're digging in to look at updating that bylaw. But we've almost had to pause that work and really start to shift and educate on what the directions are of this legislation. So I really do see, for example, one-time sort of audit or additional financial analysis related to those types of shifts fundamentally coming forward. That's why the financial plan, we've shifted to the fall in terms of giving you a more wholesome update, because really, as you've heard, a lot of the funding, we just don't know. So I think really this is what the provincial government has said, put some of it towards that better transition for local jurisdictions and apply it to that. So, and the reason for asking for some access in the immediate term is so we can be nimble and responsive. The majority of that fund, the 650 remaining, we'll be bringing back reports to you to draw out of that reserve in future budgets. This was really for immediate over the summer reviews that we just think are necessary or we're going to need to contribute with our partners.
Thanks for that comment, but I just have some difficulty still trying to get more money out of a different fund, because we've demonstrated, and staff did with the OSM, that we were able to get efficiencies and actually translate them into dollars and put them in an account, and yet we want to pull more money out of a different account. I had thought that just a question for you too, Jennifer, that those items would be covered under the OSM, and that we would not have to look at other funds to look at efficiencies of that. Those items would be under the whole strategy management mandate, or is it not?
Through the mayor, no, they wouldn't typically be. The financial impacts of Bill 108 will likely require Watson Associates, who's the third-party vendor that we use to do our development charge background study. It would likely be someone with that specialty that we would have help us with that. The audit of business processes, we would likely be looking to retain an audit firm, an actual group of accountants similar to the external audit that Carolyn spoke of earlier. We would be looking to have someone of that stature come in and actually review some of our processes and help us find efficiencies.
Thank you. Just my final question. The CAO had mentioned that they're scaling back, sort of putting that task force not on hold, but just sort of in hold motion, I guess. DC, sorry. But we also heard that if we reduce the DCs, then we would bring in more commercial revenue and wouldn't put the onerous on the commercial or on the residential tax base. So that's what I thought the whole idea of the exercise was, to possibly look at the task force, would we be reducing development charges? And then the theory would be that we'd attract more business and more commercial tax base. So maybe I should ask it to yourself.
Well, I can comment on
You can
that.
comment,
I think
that's
that's the,
That's it for me.
still the memo that council approved to go to the task force. The DC bylaw expires at the end of this year. They're still working through some of those initiatives. We'll have that information in the fall. You know, I think what the CAO's talking about, correct me if I'm wrong, is we didn't put it on hold. They're still meeting. They're just trying to wait till they see what some of these impacts are from the province before they get too far down the process, and then all of a sudden they got to reverse and start going back. So they've still got their timeline for the fall. They'll still meet their timeline for the fall for their new bylaw. I don't think anything of what you mentioned is changing. It's just we're trying to marry it up with the changes that are coming from the province at the same time. So does that make sense? Okay. Councillor Elmsley?
Just to comment on the DC bylaws, when we had amongst the lowest DCs in the province, we didn't attract a whole lot of people. So I don't think that DCs by themselves dictate whether people are going to come here and build or they're not going to come here and build. I think it's cost of doing business, and it just goes forward. And whether they're the lowest, it didn't seem to make any difference back then.
And I think that's what we're trying to flush out with the task force, so we'll have that information, we can make an informed decision. Thank you. So the recommendation that the presentation regarding the capital-related outlook for 2019 long-term financial plan update be received, and that the Chief Administration Officer be authorized to commit up to $75,000 from the contingency reserve for initiatives that support the modernization of service delivery or result in reduced costs. Does anybody want to move that? Councillor Elmsley, seconded by Councillor O'Reilly. Further comments? All in favor? That's passed. Thank you. So let's do the memo for the gas tax, and then we'll take a quick break. I know we've been pushing it here this morning, and that sort of wraps up the stuff from that. So 8.2 is the memo that I've put in, that the memorandum from myself regarding federal gas tax be received, and that up to $2 million of the additional federal gas tax funds be committed to enhance the roads capital program in 2020, and that staff include up to an additional $2 million of roads projects in the proposed 2020 capital budget to accelerate our roads program for council consideration. So no decisions, just let's get the information for the fall. So somebody want to move that? Councillor Yeo, thank you. Councillor Richardson, you'll second that. And again, just looking, we have some federal gas tax money. Take some of the programs that are in our plan, accelerate it. I think you heard quite clearly, you know, what we don't want to do in the long run, but there's no bad news in accelerating our program with some one-time funding that we have. We just need to make sure we make good decisions going forward in the plan. So is there any questions on that or comments? All in favor? That's passed. Thank you. Let's take a quick 5-minute break, and then we'll come back and deal with the last item on the agenda. Thanks. Okay, I'm going to call the meeting back to order. We're going to deal with the couple of memos here, which are part of this report, but we'll just deal with them separately because they were referred from the Committee of the Whole meeting on June 4th. So the first one, they're pretty straightforward, that the memorandum from Councillor Richardson dated June 4th, 2019, regarding the condition and adequacy of Porter and Lifford Road be received, and that staff report back to Council with recommended improvements to Porter and Lifford Roads before the end of Q3 2019 to inform future budget deliberations. So that's just a recommendation that passed at Committee of the Whole. Will you move that here, Councillor? Yes. Second by Councillor O'Reilly. Any discussion? All in favor? That's passed. Same with item 9.2 was passed and referred from Committee of the Whole. Memorandum from Councillor Dunn regarding St. James Street be received, that staff review the condition of St. James Street, report back to Council with recommended improvements before the end of Q3 2019, and that the engineering of St. James Street be included in the 2020 budget under the Urban and Rural Reconstruction Program as a decision unit, just the engineering of St. James Street. So will you move that? Councillor Dunn, seconded by Councillor Elmsley. Questions? All in favor? That's passed. Okay. So item 10.1 is the budget process and requests. So we have a report. So what we need to do before we get at all the processes is we can, that report, 2020 budget processes and requests be received. Let's do that first. Councillor Vail, thank you. Councillor Richardson, all in favor? That's passed. So the report is received. Is there anything that we need to be updated on with that report? I don't think so. It's just the decision units. So with some of the decisions we've made, I guess we'll just go through them. If you have that in front of you, we've kind of lumped them into different sections. And some of them, I think, I'll just offer my opinion and then you can decide where you want to go. Some of them I don't know what you want to do with, but I'll ask you when we get there. So identifier 1 and 2 we've just dealt with, so we're good on those. That was the 2 memos. So then Councillor Richardson has a couple of requests, 3 and 4, parts of McGill Road and Slalom Drive in Bethany. The comments say they're not included in the 5-year plan. However, they're currently working in the area under or life cycle possibility as a candidate for the life cycle extension program that we've just put some money in. So can I recommend then that we refer 3 and 4 to the life cycle extension report that's going to come back to Council after the tender is awarded? If they're part of that report, you're good to go. If they're not part of that report, there's still time to get it as a decision unit at the budget. So does that make sense? Okay, so if you're okay moving that. Seconder, I think that Councillor Yeo. Any questions? All in favor? That's passed. Do you have that? Because I think we'll use that one again, so save it. So number 5 is Councillor O'Reilly, Tower Hill Road, gravel rehab. It's on the list to be done this year, so we're good. Number 6 is Patterson Road. It looks like it's scheduled in the capital budget, Councillor Elmsley, so I assume we're good. Thank you. Number 7, Deputy Mayor, reconstruction of the bridge. I'm not sure what else you can do with it. I think it's in process, life cycle with the gas is installed, and I think it looks like it's going to be done this year. It was carried over because of Enbridge gas, so are you satisfied with that? Thank you. And then what I might suggest is number 8 and 9, which is Councillor Deputy Mayor Elmsley, Gray Road, Sturgeon Point is again a candidate, will be included in the 2019 life cycle as per council direction. And 9 from Councillor Ashmore's Tracy Hills Road, reconstruction and resurface. It's in the 5-year plan, but sections have failed, and a portion will be included in the 2019 life cycle extension. So again, can I suggest referring those two to the life cycle report that we're going to get back in a month, and then if they're on there, we're good to go. If they're not, then you can make a decision for budget at that time. So are we okay with that motion for those two? You'll move that, Deputy Councillor Elmsley? You'll second that, Councillor Ashmore? You got that? All in favor? That's passed. Number 10 is the Fenton Falls Bridge rehabilitation by Councillor Elmsley. It's currently in the 2019 Bridge Capital Program. The tender for consultant to be issued in August of 2019. Need more information, Councillor Elmsley? You're good? Thank you. Councillor Elmsley, Jubb Shore, Sackett Road, remake with ditches and culverts. Public Works has a budget, got carried over from last year, some of the work. It's a capital project for gravel resurfacing. I think sounds like you've got what you needed for that one. Okay. If I'm out of line, just stop me. Number 12, Councillor Elmsley, Fenland Falls, Coburn Street. The detailed design is currently underway and scheduled to be completed in 2019. I think that's all we can do at this point. Okay. Number 13, Councillor Elmsley, Bass, Oriole, Red Wing are to receiving capital gravel. Is that? Okay. Okay. Number 14, Councillor Richardson, slow down and pedestrian signage for local calming areas. Doesn't need a special budget request. It will be reviewed by Public Works and Engineering, and if warranted, be implemented within the operating budget. So just ask you to work with staff on that one. I think you're good. Okay. 15 and 16, I think, are the exact same situation. Walmack Shores and McGregor Drive from Councillor Ashmore has been identified as a candidate for the 219 life cycle extension, both of them. So again, we've increased funding there. So if you're okay with that same motion, we'll refer those 15 and 16 to that report coming back from that tender. If they're on that tender, you're good to go. If they're not, there'll still be time to get it in as a decision unit for 2020, okay? That is a life cycle extension, which is sections, right? The worst sections they'll repair. So that's what it's a candidate for. That's the report we're going to get back. So same motion. You'll move that, Councillor Ashmore, seconded by Councillor Richardson. All in favor? Hands up. All in favor? That's passed. Thank you. Number 17 is Councillor Yeo, Lake Dalrymple Road. South end of the road is approved in the 2019 capital budget for this year. The remaining north end is proposed for 2020. Are you good with that? Thank you. 18 is Councillor Richardson, outdoor furniture. I'm not sure what you want to, you're working with staff on that one, or there's already a bench and picnic table, benches due for replacement. I'm not sure what you're asking for from council at this point. So maybe that and the next one. You've got two there, 18 and 19. Are you good with those then? You're satisfied with 18 and 19? Thank you. And then number 20, 21, 22, 23, and 24. I might suggest these are drainage repairs for culverts. It sounds like staff are going to review this, so I would suggest a motion to review and report back in Q3, and that way there's still time for a decision unit in the budget, Councillor Ashmore, if you're good with that. So 20, 21, 22, 23, and 24, we'll refer those projects to staff for report and review back by Q3 2019. You'll move that? Thank you. Second by Councillor O'Reilly. All in favor? That's passed. 25, Councillor Richardson. Currently in the work plan, replacement counters upstairs bar at the Mandarin's Arena to be completed by the summer of 2020, currently in the work plan. You okay with that? 26, Councillor Richardson, is not in Waite Road West, Pontypool. This road is not included in the 5-year plan, is not included in the life cycle extension program. The road has been evaluated and may be considered for 2020 life cycle extension program. What do you wish to do with that? Do you want to? Well, I do want to address just because it's become a all red route because of the okay. So do you want to refer it to, as a decision unit to the budget for 2020 as a possible life cycle extension and a report back from staff? Okay. You'll move that? Thank you. Second by Councillor Vail. All in favor? That's passed. So that one's a decision unit. 27 is Councillor Seymour Fagan, Baseline Road from Vivian to Sticky Lane. Resurfacing is proposed in the 5-year plan in 2022, but we'll reevaluate for 2020. So when you say reevaluate for 2020, will that be part of a report back or part of the budget discussion, or what kind of direction are you looking for there, if anything?
Thank you, through you, Mr. Mayor. So Baseline Road, originally, when we did the comments for this appendice, Baseline Road wasn't in the 2019 localized resurfacing. We have since then added it. So depending on how that localized resurfacing holds up, we will either recommend it could wait till 2022 to resurface it, or we should accelerate it to 2020.
Okay, so then how about we refer 27 and 29, which is Shamrock Road, same thing. Let's refer those two again to the report coming back about life cycle extension, and then we can make a decision at that time. It sounds like you're covered there, Councillor Seymour Fagan, and that's the same baseline road that we're talking about? Okay. So let's refer it to that, and for a report, when that report comes back, then we can decide where we want to go from there. I think it'll be covered in the 219. So you'll move that, Councillor Seymour Fagan, seconded by Councillor Yeo. All in favor? That's passed. Baseline and Shamrock, 27 and 29. Okay. So 28 is Deputy Mayor Elmsley, Hickory Beach Road, reconstruction. The road was resurfaced in 2012. It's a candidate for the 2020 Life Cycle Extension Program. So I think that one's just following course. You're good. 30 is Councillor Seymour Fagan, Duke Street reconstruction from Main Street to West Street. 5-year plan, construction 2021. Stafford had already discussed moving it up to 2020 for design. Would be part of a larger drainage shed design for this area. Could look at hot mix overlay at locations of severe. I think maybe the way to go on that one is to get a report back for Q3 with some options, and then we can decide at that time where you want to go in the budget. Does that make sense? Okay, are you okay with that, Director? Get a report back and a few more options. So you'll move that, seconded by Councillor Elmsley. Thank you. All in favor? That's passed. You got that? Sorry. I told you we were going to wing it today. That's why Kathy's not here. We scared her away. Okay, number 31, Deputy Mayor Elmsley, 3 new hot boxes. I think staff are actually proposing 6 new hot boxes, so I think we're covered. Thank you. And then you've got 32, 33, 32 and 33. What do we got? Baseline, we've already covered, so I don't think we need to do anything with baseline. We've got that in a previous motion. Portage Road, staff proposed 5-year plan in 2022, but we'll reevaluate in 2020. What do you want to do there?
The baseline road was...
The baseline road we've dealt with as the life cycle extension?
Yeah, just Councillor Fagan, Seymour Fagan's was a section of that road, and I want the whole road looked at, so long as that's clear. It's the entirety of baseline road. And Portage, the other one was Portage Road, Highway 48. I'd like it, reevaluate for 2020 is great because, like, again, it's not the whole highway, but there are definitely some sections that could be reevaluated, moved up, that'd be great, so maybe a staff.
Do you want to report back in Q3 with some options for budget?
Yeah.
Okay. So that's number 33, Portage Road. You'll move that, Councillor Yeo, seconded by Councillor Dunn. All in favor? That's passed.
Should 32 still be included for that fall report, even though so it doesn't get missed? Because right now it's just in life cycle extension. Should still get a review back for Q3.
What's going to come back, Baseline Road's going to come back as part of that report. So I think when we get that report, just for life cycle extension.
Right.
And
So
then,
I'm just wondering if you want, for the decision units for the whole resurfacing, like, have that as part of the reporting in Q3 for future year? Because all you're going to get back is an analysis on the sections that need life cycle. That's all.
I think it's scheduled for 2022, so I think we're covered. I mean, we're going to get I think we'll be fine. I think the life cycle extension, if it's included, will get us through at least till 2022. Councillor Elmsley will hold us to the 5 years, so we'll have to go past that. So item 34 and 35 is Shadow Lake Road and Balsam Lake Drive. They're both proposed in the plan for 2020, so I don't think we need to do anything. They'll come forward as budget considerations for 2020. Councillor Yeo, you good?
I am. Now, there's one farther down in the report that ties into Shadow Lake Road 3 that's not in the 5-year plan. It's Pine Ridge Road, and it's farther down in the report with no plan, but it's a cutoff of Shadow Lake Road 3, and it's about 200 meters long. So I don't know how to deal with that. Would we deal with that later on?
Is it in a section that's not in the plan at all?
Yes. but it's kind of a continuation. We're there doing Shadow Lake Road 3.
So any that aren't in the plan at the back side of this presentation, I think what we'll be doing is we'll asking staff for a report back in Q3.
Okay.
And then we can make a decision going forward to budget.
Okay,
So
so-
probably best to just leave that one as it is,
As
and
it
that'll, if that's part of the second one. If it's not, make sure it gets added. Okay? So we'll leave 35 then, and 34. 36, the Cobeconk Wharf is Councillor Yeo. It sounds like they're working on it. Is there anything more you need there, Councillor? You're good? 37 is Councillor Richardson, Meadow View and Mount Nebo, gravel rehab. Crown need. These sections are referred to are gravel road sections that received gravel in 2016. Review this in the spring and found flat crown grade. I don't know what that means. We reviewed and found, does it need to be crowned? Is that part of the problem? So it needs to be regraded? Can we assume that'll be done? It has new gravel, Director? Yes?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, yeah. So all roads, when they're graded by staff, are generally, for gravel roads, are cut to a 4 to 6% crossfall. Some of the roads, there's limited gravel to be able to do that, but if it's receiving new capital gravel, we will prep the base and ensure that it has adequate crossfall.
But it says it received gravel in 2016. It doesn't say it's getting more. Is there enough gravel there to properly crown it?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, off the top of my head, I don't know.
Okay.
I'll advise for staff to go out and ensure there's crossfall on the road. If there's not, then we'll reach back out to engineering about future plans for that road.
Okay. You okay with that? Yes? Okay. Deputy Mayor Elmsley, number 38, Kelly's Bay Road reconstruction. It's on the plan, 5-year plan for 2022, but we reevaluate. Do you want to refer it to staff for a report back in Q3, and then we'll know what the options are?
Yes, please. I don't think it'll last till 2022.
Okay, so let's do that. Moved by Councillor Elmsley, seconded by Councillor Seymour Fagan. All in favor? That's passed. Report back in Q3, yeah. Number 39 is budget for street furnishing, benches, flowers, hooks, garbage cans, recommending $75,000 budget. Councillor Seymour Fagan. Staff are working towards preparing standards for street furniture, benches, waste, receptacles, bike racks. There's a budget of $12,000 that was added by council within the 2019 budget. I'm not sure what you're looking for here. You can't have his 12,000.
Yeah, no.
so-
What I'm looking for is where is it residing? How do you access it? We've just spent another $2,000 on flower hook replacements. Benches cost around $1,000 a piece, and they're broken every year. So there has to be some cohesive thing as to when they're going to be replaced, where they're going to be replaced. People are looking for garbage cans, and we don't know where to go. So it needs to sit somewhere.
So what would you,
I asked in my request that it actually sit within a department, and I don't know, I guess staff have to figure out where
why
it's
don't
going
we
to sit.
ask for, you want to deal with it?
So through you, Mr. Mayor, so we have a very nominal street furniture budget that resides in Public Works solely to maintain and fix. It's not a proactive program where we're replacing or expanding on the asset. This year, we have in our work program to actually expand on that budget and do exactly what you're asking. So we will be coming back through future budgets to look at where that it would reside. It would still reside predominantly in Public Works, but it would be informed by other departments or downtown initiatives that are happening. So it was something that we updated in last year's budget process. So we will be coming forward with some recommendations for street furniture. For now, the $12,000 is in that same maintenance budget that I described, and we are looking at standards for receptacles specifically that council asked for and why you established and increased the budget for one time this year. And we're working with the respective councillors to implement that portion of the program.
So when will that information or that report come back? Will it come back for the 2020 budget in time for the fall?
Correct.
You okay with that? Or do you want, well, no, I'm asking, I'm not,
That's coming back in Q3.
do you want a report back
Yeah, I
on
do.
the process?
Actually, the process and how people are supposed to.
For Q3?
That's right, how they're
Okay,
supposed
yeah.
to put in for a request.
I think that's what's coming,
all of
but
those
we can
things.
formalize
Yeah.
it, so you'll move that?
I will.
Seconded by Councillor Richardson. Just looking for some pails too, aren't you? There you go. All in favor? That's passed. Okay, thank you. Item 40 and 41, as Councillor Yeo, Coboconk and the Norland Ballpark. There's no league for booking at either facility, no rentals, no rental income. What do you want to do?
Yeah, and I put these in because I wasn't necessarily looking for a $25,000 new infields. I was looking for some capital money because in both cases, both places are going to be being taken over by management boards, and they'll be looking to do some slight improvements so they can in fact put a business plan together and get these places rented out. And so I'm looking for a little bit of capital money, not $125,000, but something more in line, like $10,000 per, and I can bring that up with staff between now and whenever, and work on a better number
For fall.
for fall.
Well, why don't we refer it to get our, so when will the management boards be in place? Do you know? In 2020. So you'd like to,
2020 for Ward Park in Norland, and the one in Coboconk is an ongoing process, so there's no firm dates yet. And maybe staff has been in contact with the Chamber of Commerce and stuff. So there's many fingers to that one, being the train station, the grounds, so it's kind of a work in progress.
okay, so why don't you work with staff, get some more information on what you're looking for, and how about you maybe we can get a memo sometime before Q3, and then we can get it either as a decision unit for a future budget, and we'll have a little bit more information. Does that work?
Perfect, I'll have a memo ready for end of Q3.
Thank you.
Thank you.
42 is Councillor Ashmore, which is Blue Water Avenue, Snug Harbor reconstruction. Public Works has been doing drainage work in this area. That's your information. I'm not sure what more you're looking for. I know they've been working there for quite a while, actually. Over the years, I've had several calls from people, so I don't know if you're looking for something more.
Just maintenance, basically, improved maintenance, not the fault of the city, I think just the overtime, it just needs cleanouts in a few spots.
And my understanding is it's part of that work plan, and it's being maintained and looked at. So you're okay with that? Yep, thank you. 43 is Councillor Yeo, the culvert at the West Bay Road to city-owned access to water. Consideration of a new culvert to facilitate drainage in the area. Public Works Engineering will need to review the area and where required, design and install an appropriate size culvert. Do you satisfied with that, or do you want to give some formal direction?
Yeah, again, I'll follow up with staff. This is, staff was unaware of this. I talked to the people on the road recently and said I would work towards something like this, so I will talk to staff afterwards and perhaps try and get some money in the budget for a study.
Okay.
And come back with another
Okay,
memo.
perfect, thank you. And number 44, side streets in Coboconk. Need to narrow it down a little.
Yeah, in the budget a couple years ago, through you, Mr. Mayor, the side streets in Norland were approved. And at that time in the budget, it said the side streets in Coboconk were coming the following year. This year, they were in fact not in the budget. And so in light of not getting forgotten and nothing in here about the 5-year plan, the roads I'm talking about are the ones that branch off the same as Norland, and they put an overlay on them all. And I realize in Coboconk there's a bit more storm drainage and stuff, but I'm just looking for a date on when the side streets in Coboconk will be improved. We have drainage issues on North Water Street. We have roads breaking up in South Water, Elizabeth, Lime. Basically, they all need to be addressed, so I'm looking for some capital money, or at least a timeline for the people in Coboconk.
Okay, so why don't we ask for a report back in Q3, and then you can make a decision from there. Does that work? Do you want to specify exact streets, or are you just saying, because staff I think are looking for, give us the name of the streets you're looking for
I
to
can
review?
certainly name the streets.
Okay,
Yeah.
so if you'll maybe get that to Joel?
Yep.
Then we can make it part of the resolution, and you okay with that?
Yep.
Report back in Q3. Second? Councillor O'Reilly, questions? All in favor? That's passed. 45 is Councillor Yeo. Geez, you're high maintenance today. Turnaround at the Bolsover Swing Bridge. Bolsover Road, Swing Bridge are both weight restricted with appropriate signage, additional signage to alternatively Additional signage to inform drivers of weight restrictions could be considered. Alternatively, there is a parcel of land owned by Environmental Canada that has an existing entrance that is chained off. If the chain was removed, the existing entrance could be used as a turnaround. You have, whose comments would they be? Engineering? Juan, do you have any comments on that? How would we make that request that the chain be removed? How would we go about something like that?
We would have to reach to Parks Canada and see if they could use that existing entrance. The entrance is right before the ridge heading westbound. It's a simple chain that's on there. It's for maintenance. There's a gravel driveway and sort of a parking lot leading into it. It would be ideal location for a turnaround. However, the primary recommendation is just to add some more signage. The signage are quite small, saying that they're load restricted. So my understanding, talking to Councillor Yeo, is truck drivers miss that little sign, and then they use private driveways to turn around. So if we could just communicate better through signage, I think we would avoid the need to build a turnaround.
So how about a motion then to install additional signage and approach Parks Canada regarding the possibility of a turnaround where the chain link is, and then we can go from there.
Yeah, I'd make a motion.
You'll move that?
Contact Parks Canada and improve the signage in the area.
Okay,
Absolutely.
seconded by Councillor Dunn. All in favor? That's passed. Thank you. Okay, and then we've got really the next bunch from 46 to 65 are not included in the 5-year plan and require staff evaluation. So rather than going through, my suggestion would be identifier 46 to 65 be referred back to staff for report back in Q3, and then we can decide where you want to go from there once we have more. We don't have enough information to make any kind of decisions today. You'll move that, Councillor O'Reilly, second by Councillor Seymour Fagan. Questions? All in favor? That's passed. And then we have a couple at the end from Councillor Ashmore, which are in the 2021 budget process. So we're struggling enough with 2020. I'm wondering if you can bring those back next year and we can deal with them at that point. Would that be all right? No, absolutely. I just mean we don't need to make any decisions for 2021 here today. So yeah, no, and if you just make a note and bring them back as part of this process, I think in 2020, then they'll be part of that discussion for 2021, if you're okay with that. All right?
Can they be applied to those roads?
Well, I think you put in a track issue concern, and it'll get sent to the appropriate for an emergency repair, and that's what those budgets are for. Okay, operating budget. Any other budget items that aren't on this list that we want to bring up now? Councillor Ashmore?
Just a question through you to Director Rojas. Will there be an update on the Omimi Bridge, the Mill Pond Bridge, like where the funding is coming from and the construction schedule for this year, next year? Just so I have an idea.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, so the Omimi EA report is coming to the next council meeting. I believe it's June 18th. There'll be a presentation at the front of the meeting by our consultant, Ian Wills, and then I've signed off on the staff report. So we first need council to endorse the preferred solution, which will be explained at that June 18th meeting. Following that, we would have to make the document public for appeal. That's a 30 or 45-day time period. Assuming that there's no appeals, it's staff's intention to bring it forward as a 2020 bridge project during the capital budget.
Councillor Dunn?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Just a couple of comments. And this is a general comment. 2 years ago when we had our wet spring that lasted forever, you can say, well, that was a one-off. Now we've had 2 of them in a row. I would like to, and I think it's going to happen every year now, I would like to see a more aggressive approach to ditching and brushing, both in the urban areas and in the in the rural areas. It's just a general comment, but I think it'll address part of our problems.
No, and I agree. And I think, Director, that part of the ditching that was scheduled, if I'm not mistaken, didn't get completed because of weather in the fall. So that carried over to this year. So is that the plan?
Yeah, through you, Mr. Mayor, because of the early fall last year, yeah, we ran out of time to complete some of the works. Now the 20, I guess it would be 18 operating budget funds expire at the end of the year. Staff are currently trying to evaluate how to complete the 2020 or the 2019 work program and also complete some of the work that wasn't complete last fall. So it's being evaluated right now.
I think we're just reiterating that, you know, as we're putting more money into our roads and trying to extend some of the life cycle, that the ditching and brushing, we now know are a big important part of that. So we don't want to do this over here if you're falling behind on this side. So keep us up to date on that if we're, as part of, we need to extend those roads. So Councillor Riley, you had a question?
Yeah, I just sent a late message into Mike Farquhar on just take a look at Bridle Road between Little Britain Road and Highway 7, so he's going to have a look at it, so it'll get looked after. Well, no, it's just for the record, that's all.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Yeo?
Yeah, I know I'm needy, but I noticed there's one road I thought I'd put in that I didn't make it. It's probably my fault, but it was County Road 41, the Bexley Road. And basically it was from Bexley north to the to 45, or even to the hot pass it did last year. It's really bad, so I was wondering if I get some information back on that section of road at this point, just in Q3.
A report back in Q3, and then we can make a decision?
Same as the rest, yeah.
Yeah, so what was it again, just exactly?
City Road 41 from the hamlet of Bexley north.
Bexley North, hamlet of Bexley North. County Road 41?
Yeah.
Got it? 41, no, Bexley North, County Road 41 from Bexley, hamlet of Bexley North. North. To 45, okay? And refer to staff for a report back in Q3. Moved by Councillor Yeo, seconded by Councillor Seymour Fagan. All in favor? That's passed. Yeah, I'm not going to say anything. Okay, so that's 10.1. So 10.2 is, I have another memorandum from myself, that the memorandum from Mayor Latham regarding the 2020 budget direction be received, that all external city agencies and boards funded in whole or in part by the tax levy be advised and notified that the city's funding level for 2020 will not exceed the 2019 contribution level, and that staff be directed to bring forward two proposed budgets for 2020. One, as per the long-term financial plan previously approved by council, and two, a 0% tax support operating budget increase over 2019 from each department. So we can get a mover and a seconder. I'm happy to speak to it. Councillor Vail, Councillor Richardson. Do you want to speak to it? No? Okay. All I'm trying to put forward here is we don't know what's coming from the province in the fall, so we're going to have to, I think, make some tough decisions in the fall with our budget, and I think this gives some direction. I'm not assuming it'll be a 0% tax increase. I'm just saying if we can target that and let staff work on some scenarios, if it was absolutely necessary, then we'll have sort of direction from here to here and some decision units in the middle, sort of doing the homework a little bit ahead of time, not knowing what's coming from the province. And then I don't feel we should be doing that with our staff if we're not telling, not asking, telling our external agencies that if you get funding whole or in part by the tax levy, with some of the changes coming up the pipe from the province, I think we need to be out ahead of it, and if we let them know now, then they can adjust some of their service levels as external agencies, and they can come in with and find efficiencies on their end. It shouldn't just be on us. So that's all I'm trying to accomplish in that. Is there any questions? Councillor Elmsley, you have a question on that?
Just a couple. Some of the external agencies have been instructed by the province to change the funding model that the municipality has to fund more. Now, I know in a couple of cases, those agencies are looking internally to see what they can do to mitigate against that, but it may not be possible. And I wonder how we intend to deal with that if they have, because I know in some cases, these agencies have been told that the split between the province and the municipality is, this is what it's going to be. And I think we talked about it with the health unit earlier as one example where it's going from 75-25 to 70-30. They may not be able to achieve those targets. Now, of course, I could make Mr. Found's head explode if I said, well, we're ahead of the game because we got an extra $2 million, but, you know, I don't want to do that. I'm just wondering, what are we going to do? Because I assume, you know, the Kawartha Conservation and some of the other conservation units are going to be faced with the same thing. And I'm not opposed to sending the letter that says that says we want to hold the line and make them look at their internal processes. I'm just wondering what the upshot is if they're unable to do that. Because I know in some cases they've been told they have to maintain the services that they are, that exist, and they're not allowed to use reserves to fund them, and that the split between the province and the municipality is to change. So I'm just wondering if we've considered that and how we intend to deal with it.
Yeah, and I mean, I can comment that when I put it together, every board and agency is different, and I respect that, and I think we're giving direction. And when it comes back, if legislatively they're not allowed to go there for various reasons, then we can make a decision at that time when we have that information. But if we don't, I know one thing, if we don't give that kind of direction, they're certainly not going to make that kind of effort to do it. So that's why I think we need to be, you know, we need to be forceful, and when these budgets come back in the fall, we can make a decision at that time as a council. We've got presentations set up from a lot of our external agencies. We can ask those questions, you know, why haven't you followed the direction of council? And as council members on those boards and agencies, we should be taking that mandate forward to them for budget discussions when we're there as well. We now have, well, if this passes, we now have direction from our council to take that forward to these boards and agencies, and they need to do the best they can to come. I don't think we can ask our staff to do that if we're not asking our external agencies to do it. I don't believe our staff, we're going to end up at zero either, but at least we've got a starting point to try to find some efficiencies. I mean, we did end up as a city with a sizable surplus this year, so I don't think we can say there's no efficiencies there. There's because of those efficiencies, we ended up with a surplus. So we just need to tighten that up a little bit, and some of those were one time. I respect that, but I think I think we'll just deal with it when those reports come back and those budgets come back in the fall. You're okay with that? Okay, thank you. Any further questions? All in favor? That's passed. Confirming bylaw, that's it. Anything further budget direction? Confirming bylaw for today's proceedings. Councillor O'Reilly, Councillor Elmsley, all in favor? That's passed. Motion to adjourn. Councillor Richardson, Councillor Yeo, all in favor? Passed. Thank you very much for coming. I said we'd shoot for noon. 12:02. Have a good day. Thank you.